And so the United States is born, it's a disaster.
I know there are two parts to the conversation. There's the before the World War and then after the World War.
So the United States is definitely profoundly founded on this idea of white supremacy. There's no two ways about it. So if you're darker skinned, you have more Jewish and Muslim ancestors. If you're lighter skinned, you have more Christian ancestors.
No way.
And that's where the whole whiteness conversation came from.
Such a stupid place to come from.
Yeah.
Why did they want to differentiate it in the
Status.
First? Just status.
Yeah, I'm pure Christian, I deserve more.
So from there, there was a way that they started looking at the Middle East.
The moment that this starts becoming chaotic, like animalistic, we're gone.
Arab history had been deliberately deleted from the European and American curriculums on purpose.
Why was it the goal?
So that, people just wouldn't understand the Middle East. So I'm gonna pause for just a second so that your listeners can think about this for a second.
So the thing is, welcome to Kuwait.
Shukran.
Have fun. So one of the things that once we spoke to you and we said we'd like to have you on بدون, we're like, what are the things that we can talk about? And mashallah, you have a lot of things that you can talk about and a lot of things that interest you. And when we were looking at the news, there was a guy called Tom Barak. He's the ambassador of Turkey. He's a real estate. Originally, he works in real estate, and now he's the ambassador of the US in Turkey. And then we saw that press conference. And that press conference, the way he spoke, did you see the press conference?
I haven't seen it, no.
Okay, so
maybe I should watch it.
We should watch it, yeah. Can we get the press conference out? Okay, as we're doing that, yeah. When did your interest in this part of the world come? Because you're from the States, you're fully American, correct? No.
No.
Okay, so tell me about that. I really want to know, because I'm intrigued.
So أمي مصرية.
Oh, mashallah. Okay.
وأبويا هو من أوروبا. هو ألماني، إيطالي، سويدي وفنلندي ويوناني وإسباني.
Ajib.
So he's a mix.
He's a mix. So you wanted to go to understand your heritage from your mom's side, like your history. Where did the interest really come from?
So I over the course of my childhood, I spent about 2 years living in Egypt, but never longer than 3 months at a time. And then I also lived in Algeria for a year. I was born in Lebanon. So I've always felt like a little bit of a connection. But when I was, I think it was 13, there was a big gap in my childhood from when we went to Egypt. I was maybe 6 or 7, and then the next time I was 13. And when I got there, I realized I couldn't talk to my relatives, and that really upset me. So I tried to learn as much Arabic as I could, just try. And it's a difficult language, obviously. And then one of the things that happened was I fell in love with Egypt in a way that I, couldn't when I was a child because I didn't understand. And there was this huge disconnect. As a 13-year-old, I was already obsessed with politics and history. And I would watch the news, and I would see the portrayal of the Middle East on the news. And then I would think about my experiences in Egypt. And, my experience, last time I was in Lebanon, I just went this year, but prior to that was 1975. Yeah. And I think we left, I want to say, like February. So right before the Civil War broke out. And my father actually went back and was there when the Civil War broke out. And so I don't have many memories from Lebanon because I was quite young, but I have like these little glimpses, these little snapshots. Okay. And I would think about the disconnect between the portrayal and the reality.
Huge disconnect, right?
Huge disconnect.
Right? Yeah.
And then because of my obsession with politics and history, I was always studying and always learning. And I learned a lot about ancient Egypt. And I was, as a teenager, I was familiar with whole chunks of Egyptian history, ancient Egyptian history. And, I knew a little bit of Roman history, a little bit of Greek history. I'm saying a little bit because in retrospect, like looking back, it wasn't that much, but it felt like a lot because it was more than everybody around me.
Yeah.
And I noticed this really weird gap. And the gap was basically from 476 AD to 1492 AD. There was like a 1,000-year hole in my knowledge. And, I knew there was the Middle Ages. I knew that there were peasants in Europe and there were knights running around killing each other. But I didn't know anything about the Middle East. That was where the gap was. And I went to the library and I checked out a book. I was 19, and I checked out a book by Sir John Bagot Glubb Basha, the Brit who stayed with the Transjordanian army after the empire left Jordan. And I don't remember which one, because I think I read like 4 or 5 back to back. But it was about Arab history. It was 7th century Arab history. And I went, oh my God, this is amazing. And then it became very clear to me that Arab history had been deliberately deleted from the European and American curriculums on purpose so that, people just wouldn't understand the Middle East. And then, of course, after that happened, I realized that one of the things that needed to happen was those stories needed to be told.
Yeah.
And so
I started watching those stories. See, after Corona, I went onto those lectures that are available on YouTube. So during Corona, a lot of the universities started putting out the lectures. So I was watching the Stanford lectures and trying to learn from them. And then the recommendations on YouTube got me to one of your lectures. And then after, I was like, this guy knows a lot. He knows a lot from a different angle, and he talks about it so passionately. And then sooner rather than later, you went on Thaqafiyya channel on Saudi, and then on another channel as well. And that's when I realized, okay, so Dr. Roy needs to be on the now. That's not a choice anymore. So thank you for being here. And that's the void, really, and the deliberate void that they left in the curriculums that we want to eventually get to, and we want to talk about, and we want to understand why this has been left void. Because the United States has been founded, or the Declaration of The Declaration of Independence was on the 4th of July, 1776. Is it?
correct.
So from there, there was a way that they started looking at the Middle East. And that's really where we want to kind of start and then move our way to the US presence and how the Middle East has been portrayed. But we really need to understand the roots of all of those actions. And that's the kind of conversation that we'd like to have. And that's really why we think that's the best, one of the best conversations we can have with you, is because you've been looking and you've lived with that culture, you understand that culture, but there are things to us that don't make sense. And we just don't understand why we suddenly became enemies. Because just like how you said, you were in the US. My brother was in Scotland before 2001, and I've seen how things dramatically changed in terms of perspective and how they look at Muslims and Arabs after September 11th, when my other brother went to Manchester to study. So putting all of these little things together and these little nuances, I'd like to have that conversation. Start from the independence, when they first came to the northern part of Africa, when the US came to the northern part of Africa without the defense of the Brits, because they just left they left the British, and now they're all independent. So talk to me about, I know there are 2 parts to the conversation. There's the before the World War and then after the World War. So how was America's presence in the Middle East, and why were they there before the World War?
Okay, so when the United States got its independence, it was bankrupt, just to start. It was a disaster. The government that was created and put into place in 1781 didn't have the ability to raise an army. It didn't have the ability to tax. It didn't have the ability to print money. And so we started our independence with a very serious debt, a debt to banks in the United States, to the soldiers. We couldn't pay the army. The United States Army during the Revolutionary War wasn't a volunteer army. It was a professional army. And we never paid them up front. We were going to pay them if we won. And so we won. I'm doing air quotes. We won. And then we didn't have the money to pay them. And so that actually will trigger a rebellion. And so the United States is born, it's a disaster. There's no currency in the marketplace, so the economy is a barter economy. And as a result, the United States is in a situation where it's facing collapse. Like it's brand new state that's in so much trouble. It will have a rebellion. It's facing economic collapse. It's a ruinous situation. So trade became incredibly important. And as a result, everybody who had the ability to was putting everything they had into trying to jumpstart the United States economy through trade. And the United States actually got in really big trouble in the 1780s. I don't remember the exact year. 1785 is in my head. And
1784.
1784, okay.
Yeah, when Morocco first country, which was in 1777, Morocco was the first country to recognize
That's
the
correct.
US, and then in 1784, the pirates seized the ship Betsy.
Okay, that's it.
That's the trouble that you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And it creates a war. I'm doing air quotes again because there's no real war between the Barbary pirates and the United States. And what ends up happening is there's a ransom basically put up. I think there was like a dozen men that were captured, and the U.S. can't pay the ransom because the U.S. is just bankrupt and just can't afford this. And so for years, it's having difficulty trading in the Mediterranean. It just can't because it has to deal with the Barbary pirates. And then finally, in the Washington administration, we pay Tripoli money. We just pay them to basically keep from attacking our ships. And it was about 2% of the United States' annual government budget.
Wow.
So it's a big chunk of money. By the time we get to Washington, that we've changed our constitution. We're now printing money. The economic situation is stabilized. We've survived one rebellion. We'll do another rebellion, though, during that administration. And then Thomas Jefferson becomes our third president. He decides that the situation is unacceptable. And he finds himself going basically to war with the Barbary pirates in 1801. So he becomes president in 1801. So he doesn't waste much time. When he was actually our ambassador to France when Washington was working out the deals with the Barbary pirates. And Jefferson actually wrote that he wished we had gone to war with them. So he does when he becomes president. And the Navy was created in the 1790s. He creates the United States Marine Corps. He sent, I think the number was something like 11, 12, something like that, Marines to the Ottoman Empire. And they hired about 500 Greek and Arab mercenaries. And then there were some sailors with them, and then some civilians. So maybe it was 16 people from the United States. Like it was a tiny number, and 500 Greek and Arab mercenaries. And they began a 4-year-long campaign against the Barbary pirates. And so in a way, that was kind of the United States' first war outside of North America. And it's certainly the first war against anybody in the Middle East or North Africa. And in the end, one of the things the United States successfully did was split the Barbary pirates. So some of the Barbary pirates stayed out of the war and either sided with us or sort of tacitly. And so one of the interesting relics of this is that the United States Marine Corps, its ceremonial saber, it was given to them by one of the Barbary pirates.
So that was the first time that they ever had any battles outside of the US. Everything was inside, whether it's a civil war or anything, any rebellions within the US. And that wasn't close to them in Mexico. It wasn't anywhere else. It was right in North Africa, where the Middle East really is. And from there, they started becoming more involved in that region. And that's really where I would like to move to the religious imagination of the Middle East and the type of involvement that they had and how different it was to the Europeans and the Brits. Because the Europeans and the Brits were present in a different way where they had soldiers on the ground. But the US didn't want to do that. They had hospitals, they had education, they had more of a soft power. So why do you think this type of policy was taken, and how were they perceiving the Middle East at that time?
Okay, so the answer is this is really complicated. In 1760, the British Empire did a census of their American colonies, and they concluded that Islam was the third largest religion So I'm gonna pause for just a second so that your listeners can think about this for a second. I don't remember if it was Baptist first or Methodist first. The other one was second. Islam was third. And the reason, of course, was because of the slave population. Many of the slaves were coming from West Africa and were actually Muslim. So there were also slaves coming from East Africa and Central Africa, and it was just enough that it pushed Islam into third place in terms of size. By 1770, that number had dramatically dropped. And the reason is the United States, it wasn't the United States yet, the British colonies in the Americas launched a campaign of basically de-Muslimizing the slave population. That became one of the goals.
Why was it the goal?
There was fear that if the slaves weren't Christian, it would become the basis for rebellion. It would unify the slaves around a different religion. They were also worried that the non-Christian, non-Muslim slaves that were being brought over would be converted to Islam. And also, and this is really important, there is a profound historical hatred of Islam built into European civilization and European culture. So that was inherited by those colonists. They were very clear about this. I'll give you an even earlier example of how this manifested. So one of the myths about the United States is that it was set up for religious freedom. It's not real. It's not true.
Myths.
Yeah, it is a myth. What happened was people were going to the colonies to set up their own colonies. For example, the Puritans, they set up the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They went there not because they wanted to create religious freedom, but because they wanted to be the guys who were doing the persecuting rather than being the people who were being persecuted. So they just wanted to flip it around. The first colony that actually did try to do something resembling religious tolerance was Maryland. The reason wasn't because the Marylanders were, these hand-holding, lovey-dovey people.
Liberals.
It's not true. What happened was Maryland was set up, and that's why it has its name, as a Catholic colony. But the Marylanders, the Catholics who started going there, realized Protestants were moving in faster than they were. And they realized at some point the Protestants would simply take over the colonial charter. And if they did, they would probably do something that excluded the Catholics, because that's what other colonies were doing. They were creating laws that were specifically intolerant towards other religions. So the Catholics decided to build into their colonial charter a tolerance clause. And it said, as long as you worship the Trinity, you are free to worship in Maryland. Now, what's interesting about that is they said specifically the Trinity. Because if they wanted to exclude Jews, because many of the colonists were profoundly anti-Semitic, if they wanted to exclude Jews, all they had to do is say, you have to believe in Jesus. But Muslims believe that Jesus is a prophet, so to make sure they also excluded Muslims, they said the Trinity specifically, right? So and this is early on, this is the 1600s, they're wasting no time. Yeah. So by the time we get to 1760, they're seeing the large population of Muslims as a serious problem. So I want you to have that in the background, like that's part of what's going on here. Another thing that was fueling U.S. interest in the Middle East was the British did a census, and how reliable were these censuses? It's unclear, but the British did a census. I'm pretty sure it was early on in the 19th century, where they estimated that 25% of the Middle East was Christian. We know that the percentage of Middle Easterners that were Christian was actually quite high. I don't know if 25% is accurate. But one of the reasons why they did this was they wanted the excuse to put pressure on the Ottoman Empire. And they did. They successfully put pressure on the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire began to reform some of its rules around religion. And the Ottoman Empire realized that these rules were actually a precursor to a possible invasion at some point. So they had to do it.
So they felt at the time that the responsibility of Christians lied on them as Western civilizations? Or
No, I don't think so. I think they believed that they could use this as an excuse to justify this in the minds of the public. They were just after the land, like they didn't care. They didn't actually care that there were Christian Arabs. This is just an excuse to do something against the Ottoman Empire.
Okay, so there were some explorers at the time, and there were some people who went and wrote stuff about the Middle East. And one of the things that they started pushing when they came back to the States around that time as well, is around the early 1800s, is that the East is great in its past, but weak in its present,
Yes.
and in need of someone to repair it. This duality, admiration, and belittlement at the same time was the core of the emerging American perspective. So that's religious, from what I understand from it. It's like they had a religious perspective on the Middle East, because the way we view the US is after the Declaration of Independence, and the way they tell their narrative and their story is, it's the land of the free. And that's what we would like to believe, honestly, is that it's a place, it's a country where people from history, from its birth, it was looked at the world in that sense. So, but when we read read the literature, it tells a different story. So they came in with that eye. So why was the Middle East in specific had an important religious angle to it as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so there's a lot of things going on. One of them is Jerusalem is here. And there was this sense of it's the Holy Land. That's, how Americans regularly refer to the Middle East, or at least Palestine. And but also a lot of Americans saw this as an opportunity to spread Christianity. In other words, they wanted to also missionize the Middle East. So they began sending missions with that specific goal. Some of them were, honest to goodness, Arabophiles. They fell in love with Arab culture. They just wanted to be part of it in some way, and they wanted to come and do good. So it's a mixture of different vectors. With some, I would imagine that the average person who came to the Middle East came here with good intentions. The intentions of the state and the policymakers and the politicians, I don't think were ever good. But certainly the volunteers, the adventurers, the missionaries,
But the missionaries here, they were. So when we say missionaries, do we mean hospitals, schools? What do you mean when you say?
Yeah, I mean, like AUB was originally set up as a Protestant mission, and now it's
The first hospital in Kuwait was an American hospital.
yeah.
But on the other hand, were they weren't Catholic though. They were Protestants.
Well, so I believe there were some Catholics who were coming here, but majority were going to be Protestant because the United States is overwhelmingly Protestant.
Yeah. And they were evangelical. Like now we have this term that we're learning recently that I didn't know that those people existed until like the past 2 years maybe. So before that I never knew I thought they were Protestants and Catholics. Now we know that there are people who they call themselves evangelicalists, if I'm saying it correctly. But what's this term, and is this something new, or is this? I wanted to talk about the history of this ideology, really, just to understand it.
So evangelicals, it is a 160-year-old idea. In the United States, initially, first of all, the term actually, evangelisch, is the German word for Protestant. So it's not the same. In the United States, it's used differently than it is in Germany. In the United States, it was an idea that you should have a certain set of values. One of the things you should believe is that Jesus is coming back, and he's coming back very soon. You need to prepare your life for that return. And of course, before Jesus can come, there's going to be an Armageddon event. And they came up with this idea of the rapture in the process. As I'm unclear why they believe this is going to happen, but they believe that some souls will just simply be lifted straight to heaven when Armageddon starts. And then one of the interesting things about them originally, so they're very different, it's a very different idea than it is today, was that they believed that Jesus cared about the poor and the sick. So it was part of their ideology that they had to take care of the poor and the sick. And so that's one of the reasons why evangelicals were interested in the Middle East. They saw this as a place where they could come do real good, help people who were in desperate need. For example, I can't remember her first name. Her last name was Trasher. She went to Asyut, Egypt, and she set up an orphanage. I don't know if she was an evangelical or not, but she's going to Asyut, Egypt, because she just believes this will make the world a better place.
Yeah, those missionaries played an important role in World War I when we come to it, and they saved a lot of people, and they tried helping a lot of people, and I believe that. But at the same time, we have, towards the late 1890s, we had people say things like, we need to start making a place for Jews in the Middle East, and it was from religious Protestants in the US. So you did mention that it's a mixture, but I really want to understand how the policies that we will soon see after, I just want to really understand and grab the roots, just to understand where all these little things came from.
Yeah, so one of the things that happened is the evangelical movement began to slowly evolve into what it is today. So today, I think it's fairly safe to say that most evangelicals in the United States don't care about the poor and the sick. They want their taxes cut, and they want immigrants blocked out of the United States. In other words, there's been a real ideological shift in the movement, which it's totally inconsistent with what happened in the beginning. One of the reasons why they became interested in Jews moving back to the Middle East, well, there's two. One is just anti-Semitism. If you can get the Jews to go to Palestine, they're not in the United States or Europe anymore, and it gets them out of your community.
Why did they hate having Jews around?
So the history of this is obviously
It's a pure anti-Semitic, like we understand, but it has to come from a belief that is very wrong. Well, I just don't understand where that thing come from.
So the Roman Empire hated the Jewish population, and the Jews were regularly rebelling. They liked to throw stones, so the Romans thought of them as just stone-throwing maniacs. And the Romans did multiple crimes against humanity and genocidal events, ethnic cleansing events against the Jews. The last one was in 629 or 630, end of 629, beginning of 630. And the Romans, I think they killed around 20,000 Jews in Palestine, and they expelled them completely from Jerusalem. And then there's like a little bit of a gap where anti-Jewish persecution by Europeans, it's not high. It's there, but it's not overwhelming until 1096. So there's a 450-year gap between the end of Roman persecution and then the 1096 is the start of the Crusades. To launch the Crusades, Crusaders in Germany and then the French Crusaders who had joined those Crusaders in Germany attacked the Jewish communities on the Rhine River. They killed thousands, I don't remember how many, 6,000, 9,000, something like that, and they raped thousands of Jewish women. And that's how they initiated the Crusades. And then when they arrived in the Middle East, they would wholesale slaughter the Jewish community. Now, they were also slaughtering Muslims, but when they would slaughter Muslims, they would clean out the mosques, knock off the crescent moon, stick a cross on them, and turn them into a church. When they would slaughter the Jews, they would just burn the synagogues down because they believed that the Jews were so contaminated and so vile that there was no way to cleanse a synagogue to make it holy.
Wow.
And that 1096 event is the beginning of the culture of pogroms. So anytime anything would go wrong in Europe for the next 850 years, you would blame the Jews in the area, and then a mob would go attack their village or their community. And the Jews became this permanent scapegoat for European politicians. I mean, there would be a thunderstorm, and there'd be damage done to the town, and they'd say the Jews did it. They cast a spell. And so there was this sort of ingrained anti-Jewish madness that had taken over in Europe.
So back to if anyone says, let's make a home for the Jewish population in the Middle East, at the bottom of it is just anti-Semitic.
Yeah, there's a huge anti-Semitic component to it. I don't think that's the only reason, but it's certainly a major reason. And especially for, the Zion... Eventually, the people who labeled themselves as anti-Semitic, because there were people who actually took the label with pride, the original term was Judenhass, which just means Jewish hatred. They decided that in the 19th century when everything's scientific and there's supposed to be reason, that having your ideology have the word hate in it sounded too emotional, so they switched to anti-Semitism to make it sound scientific.
Yeah, it does sound scientific.
It's got ism in it. When those guys...
And then when you go to Islam, it's Islamophobia. So I just don't understand why it's Islamophobia and anti-Semitism.
I'm just scared of Muslims, that's all.
Okay, so so how did that develop after? So we have the 1800s, and then slowly, I want to come slowly to the World War I, but keep going. So lead me to World War I.
Well, so before that, though, there was this other component that I think drives a lot of the Zionism in the United States today, and that's the belief that Israel is going to start Armageddon, and then that brings Jesus back. And about 30% of the U.S. population believes that this is what's going to happen, that Israel will basically start World War III, and Jesus will come back to earth to defeat, the forces of evil, and that'll bring in 1,000-year reign of Jesus directly ruling the world, and the world will be wonderful it'll be like heaven for 1,000 years. And so there's also a component of Christian fundamentalists in the United States who believe that Israel is necessary for the religious purposes.
So they don't like them, but they support them because that's going to bring back Jesus.
Yes. And then also by supporting them, you get them out of your community. It's double bonus.
But politically, you have to say things like they have the right to defend themselves, they have the right to the land, they have the historical right, and all of these little politically correct sentences just to get the goal done, really, more or less, right?
But also, I imagine that there are a lot of Americans who really do believe they have a right to the land, that this is somehow correcting some kind of error, that there was...
like they feel bad for history, for what happened in history, about the Roman Empire and all that.
I doubt the average American knows much about the Roman Empire. There was a movie called Masada that was made in the 80s that I think gave a little bit of that, right? Yeah. But I think a lot of it is the Holocaust and Holocaust guilt. Yeah. And, I'm part German, so I have Holocaust guilt. And my ancestors left Europe 121 years ago. They had nothing to do with it, but it doesn't matter. It bleeds over ethnically. And, 21 or so % of the U.S. is of German descent. So there's this huge sense of, what did we do? Also that drives this. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's logical because what happened was horrible. And you don't want that to happen to anyone, really. So
even Palestinians. Yeah, you don't want that to happen to them either.
The irony when you said that they used to call them rock throwers.
Yeah.
The irony that they call Palestinians rock throwers now. And the roles have changed.
But they haven't, because if you were to genetically test the average Palestinian, you'd find they were about 80% Jewish genetically. They're just converts to Christianity and Islam. They're not...
No, I always thought about that, but I just never really bothered to research it. So that's the statistic, huh?
There was a study that was done, I want to say it was 10, 15 years ago, and it got suppressed. So it came out, people got to look at it, and then it disappeared.
Let's do it again, Roy. I'll help fund it if you're going to do it.
Well, all we need to do is send 23andMe packages to the Palestinians.
Yeah, just get a significant number.
Yeah, 1,000+ people, and you're good to go.
Because that's what I thought, because they say they have the right to the land, but I always wanted to research the Palestinians and where did they really come from. And if they're originally Jewish and they converted, then it's very simple. They also have the right to the land. And let's just fix everything.
Also, this idea of the right to the land at some level is, first of all, complicated by history. I mean, Phoenicians lived in the coastal cities in Palestine. So if you really want to do right by the land, all the coastal cities should belong to Lebanon. And then there were Arabs always living in the Negev. And so that should go to Saudi Arabia or something.
So where do you draw the line?
Where do you draw the line? And at what point do you stop? So did you stop 1,000 years ago? Because the land belonged to Crusaders 1,000 years ago. Yeah. This idea of oh, there was a moment when, well, yeah, there was a moment when Egypt owned it. In fact, Egypt regularly owned Palestine throughout history. Whether it was the Mamluks or the 18th dynasty, there was frequently an Egyptian military and political presence.
Yeah, and which is going to bring back the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, I mean, and so this idea that there's this historical ground, like this belongs to me. Well, my land in Austin, Texas certainly doesn't belong to me then, because there's a Native American nation that should own it.
Yeah, and look, when I look at a nation like the US, like it's very much advanced technologically, physics, science, everything. So you'd assume that a country like that would have the best and the most solid rationale when they approach any complicated situation. But when you go to something that is as simple as that, like, where do you draw the line? And that doesn't, if your ancestors owned the land and they were kicked out 1,500 years ago or so, well, that doesn't mean that you have the right today to come and kick people out. So those little things, once we understand the real angles of the situation, is how we really understand. And that's really what I'm trying to understand now, is how do they look at us really? Like, how do they think of the Arab Peninsula? How do they think of the Middle East? So they had soft power. How did they differentiate themselves, the Americans, in the late 1800s, leading to the early 1900s, from the Europeans before World War? How did they look at themselves in terms of the type of colonialism that they were doing, or the imperialism?
So the U.S.'s imperialism was very different from European in one way. When they would go into a state, like usually Central America was the happy hunting ground for the United States. We invaded Honduras 8 times, I think, and then I think we invaded Nicaragua 7 times, Guatemala 5 times. What we would do is they would make this terrible mistake of raising the price of bananas. And I'm not kidding. It really was bananas. They would raise the price of bananas because what frequently would happen in a Central American state is they would decide to change the agricultural system to allow for more people to have more wealth. So there was a peasant-based agriculture system in Central America where there was effectively a noble, a person who ran a plantation, and then there were peasants on it. And periodically, the government would go, we're done with this. We're going to free the peasants. We're going to give them the land. They'll get the profits. We don't need this old feudal system to be here. And then the United States would send in the Marine Corps, invade the place, shoot it up, topple the government, install a puppet government that would restore the old system, and then go back. And that's why there's the term banana republic.
I see.
And it's because it was literally about the price of bananas. Americans just didn't want to pay an extra 10 cents for their bananas, and so we would go in and shoot the place up. The British or the French would go in and conquer the place. They would use that as an excuse to stay there permanently. They'd plant their flag, they'd put a military presence, and then they would build a railroad track so they could extract the resources, and then they would say, look, we built you a railroad track.
But the resources are all gone for free.
Yeah, like every time somebody says, yeah, the British built India railroad tracks. Yes, to plunder the place. They didn't do it because they loved India. They did it so that they could get the goods to the port so they could take them to London.
Did they get away with it because they're just stronger and they had an army?
Yeah. I mean, that's what it is. Might makes right, right? That's the way the world has worked. When the British were conquering, before the British began conquering India accounted for 1/4 of the world's GDP. When India got its independence in 1947, it accounted for 4% of the world's GDP. That's how effective the British Empire was at plundering India.
Wow. So they viewed themselves differently in terms of they would go topple a government and then they'd come back. But the Brits and the European countries, what they did is they just had a different ideology in terms of how they would just take all the resources. But what America really wanted is they just wanted better trade deals.
Yeah, that's what it boiled down to. So that's one thing that's going on. The other thing is the United States wasn't a superpower. It was, the superpower in North and South America, but it had competition, for the record. It wasn't that much more powerful than Mexico or Brazil in the 19th century. And so the United States didn't have the ability to get involved in the Middle East militarily. And it chose not to get involved in Africa militarily. It was slowly, towards the end of the 19th century, starting to look at East Asia. And eventually we'll start doing the same thing that we were doing in Central America to East Asia. And we begin invading, Korea and China repeatedly. Long before the Korean War, we had gone to Korea multiple times. And so that was sort of the playbook that the United States operated under. The United States, I think, also didn't think, even if it wanted to, that there was anything in the Middle East it really cared about. So that's one of the reasons why initially it's just missionaries and it's just private individuals. Is U.S. foreign policy was aimed very specifically at Latin America and East Asia.
Until the Suez Canal in 1869, when they realized that, no, there's going to be huge trade in the Middle East. And then they came up with some of the concept called the Manifest Destiny.
No, Manifest Destiny was the idea that we would own everything to the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
So we had to conquer California and Oregon and Washington.
Oh yeah, that's the one. Okay, so that had nothing to do with the imperialist ideology where we just need to expand.
Well, it does, because we wanted to expand in North America first.
So, okay.
Yeah, and we declared victory in 1890. We said that the frontier was closed. We had successfully conquered what we were going to conquer in North America. But when you think about it, that's originally U.S. foreign policy is what we think of as domestic policy, because we had all these Native Americans that we had to genocide, ethnically cleanse, remove, and then put in concentration camps that we call reservations. That took a lot of effort. And it was an international event because each of those different Native American nations was its own nation. And we did it slowly, right? We had to do it systematically, because if we attacked them all at once, we wouldn't have been able to win. But it took decades to do that. So that was part of our ideology as well, as it's okay to take somebody else's land. It's okay to take their resources. It's okay to just be there. I mean, when you think about it, as a person who lived in the United States for the majority of my life, there's this weirdness about, I own this house, I live here, and there's no, wow, what came before? One of the questions I usually ask my students in my Texas government classes, name the Native American nations that used to be here in Austin, Texas. And of course they can't do it. They don't even know the names. So
to them it just didn't exist.
Yeah, the goal is erase. There are pyramids in the United States.
Yeah.
This is something I think the average person
the United
doesn't.
States,
Yeah,
I didn't know.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say in America.
I mean, they're in Mexico, Guatemala, sure.
Yeah.
There are also pyramids in Illinois.
I never knew that.
Yeah. On purpose, you don't know this. So the pyramids are actually not stone. They're made out of earth. So, maybe people think they're not quite as amazing because they're made out of dirt. But what's really amazing is that the Native Americans built them in a place that had no native stone. So when they built the foundation, it is stone. They had to import the stone from hundreds of kilometers away. And then they figured out the right mixture of clay, sand, and silt to basically make erosion-proof dirt. And they built these pyramids using this high-tech mixture of clay, sand, and silt, and they're still there. Well, some of them are. The biggest one is in a place called Cahokia. It's right across the Mississippi River from St. Louis, Missouri. When you go there, you'll hear Chinese spoken, you'll hear Japanese spoken, you'll hear German and French spoken, because all the tourists are from somewhere else. You hardly hear any English because Americans don't even know it exists.
Wow.
But it's not, Cahokia isn't the only site. There were hundreds of sites all around there with little mounds. And what developers did was they went in with bulldozers, they bulldozed the mounds and they shoved them into nearby ponds and built housing developments where the ponds used to be. And the goal was erase.
Was the goal erase or just didn't know better?
There was probably a little bit of ignorance. There was probably a lot of greed. But there was also in the background where erase. Because
to them they meant nothing.
It was this past that they weren't connected to. So it made them, it probably sat in the back of their head like, we were really violent. What we did here was really wrong.
Yeah.
And then, so how do you justify it? Well, they didn't try to justify it. They tried to erase it. There was in Ohio, I can't remember the name of the site. It's an amazing site. Mound people is what we called them at the time. Mississippian culture. They had built this mound that really interesting structure. It had stuff buried inside of it. Just a magical place. And in World War I, the United States military, the Army, decided that was going to be their training ground, that specific spot. But to build the barracks on it, they had to put the barracks on stilts because of the mounds. But then they didn't want to spend that much money on wood, so they cut the tops of the mounds off. And then they built the barracks on top. The United States ran out of land. Like, this was literally the last place in the United States they could build a military base. They could have built this anywhere. Yeah. They did this on purpose. There's no other explanation. So when you go to the site, you can still see the mounds. They're just half as tall as they used to be.
Can we look up the pyramids in Illinois and the mounds?
Cahokia.
You can put them on the TV. That's interesting. I just never knew that there were pyramids in them. That was mind-blowing.
Isn't that mind-blowing?
Because he said that and I said, okay, of course he means America. He might have just he said United States. And then I looked at you again and said, no, he definitely said United States. So that's part of the cultural history that the US is very much okay with. That you're able to take someone else's land because we've done that before and we can justify it by maybe hundreds of years later we'll just apologize.
We'll name our helicopters after them. So we'll have the Chinook and the Apache and the Black Hawk.
Yeah, that's the way to let go of the guilt.
Yeah. So they were such cool people. And let's make nice movies about them.
And we'll give them casinos.
Actually, they took the casinos.
What do you mean?
The Native American nations, when they would surrender, we would write treaties that gave them sovereignty. So a Native American reservation might be in a state, but it's a sovereign entity, so that state has no jurisdiction in that reservation. So it's one of those what moments, right? So if you look at a map of Arizona, about a quarter of the state is Native American reservations. So the state of Arizona has no jurisdiction in that quarter of its state. In other words, the map should be changed and those Native American reservations should just not be in Arizona because there's no point in them being in Arizona. So if you go to the Navajo Nation, which is the largest reservation in the United States, it just passed the Cherokee for number of people too. So it's largest in land and barely largest in population. The Navajo Nation does daylight savings, but the state of Arizona doesn't. So half of the year, they're in a different time zone than the rest of the state. And because of this, most of the states have laws strictly banning casinos. The Native Americans went, we're sovereign entities. We don't have to obey your state laws. So they began making casinos.
Oh, so are they still a sovereign entity?
So right now there is a campaign to reduce Native American sovereignty in the United States.
Sovereignty as in they have a different jurisdiction, different rules, different regulations.
Yes.
Everything else. So it's like a different country.
Almost. They still have to abide by federal law. So they're still part of the United States. Okay. They're just not part of the individual states.
Okay, that's interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
There was a Supreme Court ruling, Oklahoma v. Castro Huerta, and I think it was 2023. And that ruling did actually diminish Native American sovereignty. So there is a current campaign to see if they can knock it down a notch. Okay. But that's why they have the casinos. And then the idea behind the casinos is you bring in the Italian mob. They help you set up the casinos, just like they did Las Vegas, because that's who did Las Vegas too.
Godfather too.
Yeah. And then you bring in the Italian mob. You set up the casinos. You split the money with the Italian mob, and then the rest of the money goes to the Native American population. And historically, Native Americans have been the poorest communities in the United States, and now they're some of the richest communities in the United States. So it's a little bit of financial vengeance, I think.
They have a cool past, but we just don't know what it is, and we're not going to teach it to in universities.
For the record, there are stone cities in the United States.
Stone cities?
Yeah, cities that 4-story tall buildings made out of stone that the Native Americans built. You can go to the ruins. They're national parks. They're just not advertised. So the average American doesn't even know they exist.
Yeah, and that's been done on purpose, obviously, because America is a huge marketing media engine. That's gonna talk about every little thing, right?
Wildly successful too.
Yeah, and they just they'll know how to market this wire between the microphone and the stand. So they'll do everything to market every little bit. So when I see all these things that they've successfully marketed, people bought, and it's a huge capitalist country. And then when you see like part of the real deep stories that they could capitalize on, and they've not been doing that. Of course, it has been done on purpose, or it's just talking about this white supremacy theory that's it's present in the American culture, and we've seen it. Like the video that I was going to show you is the U.S. ambassador recently came to a press conference in Lebanon, and he just spoke to the journalists, and he told them, "Do not behave like animals." And you need to see this video. And it's been all over social media the past week.
Okay.
I need to show you.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to pull up the video. I actually have the video next to me now because Munira is having trouble doing it on the TV for some reason. But I'm going to pull up the video here on the laptop and I'll show it to you. Just get the ad out of the way. So yeah. See what he says.
You just had three of the most...
Hello.
Okay, wait. This we're going to have a different set of rules, right? Please be quiet for a moment. And I want to tell you something. The moment that this starts becoming chaotic, like animalistic, we're gone. So you want to know what's happening, act civilized, act kind, act tolerant, because this is the problem with what's happening in the region.
Wow.
See, act civilized, act tolerant, act kind. And all of these terms animalistic. He comes in, he's not in his country, and he's supposed to be an ambassador, and he speaks to people that way. So I'm trying to look at things objectively because that makes me angry when I look at it again. So I'm not going to be angry. But why? How is this present? How is he able to? How does he have the courage? How does he have the mind? What is going through his mind to give him the okay to go ahead and talk to people that way?
Yeah, I mean,
are you surprised? You've not seen this? No?
I mean, I haven't seen it. I'm not surprised, but I'm still horrified.
It's horrific. Right? Yeah.
It reminds me of that. I think he was a CNN journalist in 2022 when Putin. People get confused about this. He didn't attack Ukraine in 2022. He attacked in 2014. He ramped up the war in 22 and expanded it. So when Putin expanded the war in 2022 and began actually bombing Kyiv, there was a journalist there, and he goes, I'm paraphrasing, you don't expect to see this in a European country, a civilized country. And then he says, this isn't Baghdad. And you're like, oh.
These are people who look like us.
Yeah,
they can be our neighbors. They have blue eyes.
Yeah,
that's it. That reporter was saying that. Yeah.
So the United States is definitely profoundly founded on this idea of white supremacy. There's no two ways about it. It had to be, because how else could you justify in your mind, I'm going to take this land from these Native Americans, and then I'm going to bring slaves over and I'm going to steal their labor. There's no way to justify that other than God really loves me and he doesn't really like those folk as much. And as a result, it's okay for me to exploit them.
How is it justified? Is it justified by racism or something religious? Or how is this justified in the cultural, deep, ancient mind of the people who did all of these actions? I really want to understand.
Okay, so the idea of white supremacy has a really fascinating origin. It actually starts in Spain. So the Reconquista, which is a poorly named event, the Reconquest, how can you reconquer something when you never owned it to begin with? So the idea is that the northern Christian kingdoms in the Iberian Peninsula are going to conquer from the Muslims the rest of the Iberian Peninsula, and then eventually Portugal and Spain are created out of that. And they called it the Reconquista as if they had owned it at one point. But they didn't. This is a different people now, because the population of people that the Arabs conquered when they conquered the Iberian Peninsula, it was German-ruled Iberia. It was Visigoths that were ruling it. And before them, the Vandals had ruled the south. That's where Andalusia comes from, because there's no va in Arabic. They just dropped the sound. And then before that, it was the Roman Empire. And in other words, this idea of Spain was really created in 1492 by Queen Isabella, right? She's the person who creates Spain. The Roman province was called Hispania, and that's where España, the name, comes from.
Makes sense.
But Isabella, the Queen of Castile and Leon, is the person who created Spain. She said, there will be a Spain, and boom, there it was. She was that powerful.
She was that powerful.
She really was. She was an absolute monarch who was a visionary and literally created a country and changed the way the world thought about that place. And in the process created an empire that spanned, they owned the Philippines, they owned North and South America. And then eventually she had married so heavily into the Holy Roman Empire that they owned Germany and Italy and Portugal. I mean, they had colonies in Africa and India. You're like, how did you do this?
Listen, Isabella needs to teach us how she did all that.
Yeah, she was really cruel. There was a lot of violence and plunder.
So how does this get tied up to the white supremacy?
So human beings love hierarchies. We want there to be somebody on top and somebody on bottom. It is just our nature. I didn't used to believe this. I have come to this conclusion that this is just how we are. So.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Whether we like it or not.
It makes it easier for many people to live.
Exactly.
Right?
There's a population of people who they just follow and they're happy to follow.
Yeah.
And they know their place in society and they're good to go.
Yeah.
And then, there's that cantankerous group of people who are always in rebellion no matter what's going on. Like everything is great and they're still mad.
Yeah, because there are fewer leaders and more followers just in general, just to make life easier.
Yeah.
Because, again,
it does.
You need more followers. Like, I think there should be more followers, but they should be a little bit more conscious, just a little bit more.
Yeah, and a little bit more informed.
Because I think if everyone were naturally just wanting to lead, there won't be any group work with there.
No, it would be a disaster.
Yeah, so I agree with you. It's just sometimes things don't happen the way we like and just catastrophes happen.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me more.
So the Christian kingdoms in the north, I'm saying it this way because the population in the south is just as Spanish as the population in the north. The way we talk about it is that the Spaniards conquered the Muslims. The Muslims in the south, first of all, it was Muslim-ruled south. The majority of the population in the south was still Christian because the Muslims didn't convert by the sword. So when they conquered the Iberian Peninsula, it was a majority Christian place. Egypt was a majority Christian place until 600-700 years ago because there was no compulsion to convert. The Crusades encouraged a lot of people to convert just because they were like, I don't know if I want to be associated with those guys anymore. But, Egypt is still somewhere between 10 to 20% Christian. We don't know because the government won't do a census. I bet it's closer to 20%. The government says it's 10, so it's 20.
Okay.
We all know how this works. And so what you had in the South was Muslim-ruled Christian, Jewish, and Muslim population that spoke a language that was a hybrid of Arabic and Latin. And by the way, there was some German mixed in it and some Celtic mixed in it, but it was primarily Latin and Arabic. And they also, obviously did things in Fusha, but locally they spoke this hybrid language. In the North, they spoke the same hybrid language. The difference between the North and the South was the South was rich, the South was technologically advanced, the North was technologically backwards, the North was poor. The North was Christian fundamentalists who wanted to kill off or expel the entire Jewish and Muslim population.
Why?
That was their goal, their expressed goal. I don't know why. I mean, when you think about it, why would you get rid of your smartest, best educated, and richest segment of your population? That makes no sense. Yeah. Conquer them and then tolerate them.
And have them work for you.
And have them work for you. But they wanted to conquer and then expel or forcibly convert or murder. And they systematically did it. It took them, 6 centuries, 7 centuries to pull this off, but they ultimately do it. But in the process, somebody sat down and went, who here is purer Christian than the next person? And they were like, I don't know how to tell that. It's not like they had, genealogy traced back for 700 years. And so what they came up with was Arabs are darker. So if you're darker skinned, you have more Jewish and Muslim ancestors. If you're lighter skinned, you have more Christian ancestors.
No way.
And that's where the whole whiteness conversation came from.
Wow. Such a stupid place to come from. Such a stupid place.
And it's
all of these problems today and today's problems all came from this specific gathering where people said, how are we going to differentiate between Christians, Jews, and Arabs and Muslims?
No, but it's worse than that. How are we going to differentiate between the different Christians? Because they want to say that Christian has pure Christian ancestry, that Christian has more Jews and Muslims in their ancestry. This is a thing, Christian versus Christian. This is why this is crazy.
Oh, so there are layers to it now.
Yeah.
I just realized. Yeah. Okay. So there's a layer. So they wanted to differentiate who's more Christian. Yeah. Now I see it. And based on that, they will get things in return. As in, so why did they want to differentiate it in the
Status.
First place? Just status.
Yeah, I'm pure Christian. I deserve more.
Position.
And, a better position. And so this whiteness thing kicked in, and it began to really matter in Spain, and little by little it spread across Europe. And eventually it got mingled with slave trade and genocide of the Americas, and then the next thing you know, they're building empires. And
so the whiter you are, the more Christian you are. That
was the original process.
So did there are a lot of black community Christians and brown Christians and people who lived in America and lived with those white supremacists eventually. So that was so the white supremacy carried, because if you sit with anyone now who is racist, he wouldn't know where this comes from. He wouldn't be able to tell you what you just told me, right?
Yeah.
He wouldn't tell me that I'm purer. He wouldn't say that, right?
No.
So it's weird how the human biology works, is that it's still there.
It's still there. I mean, Jesus is frequently portrayed as a blue-eyed blonde, or at least a light brown-haired guy who looks like he's from Sweden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We all know he was brown. He was definitely, if he's going to be from this part of the region, he's not going to be white.
Okay, so here's a twist on twists. I think the year is 1907. Don't quote me on the year. It was somewhere between 1901 and 1909. There was a person who is Christian Arab from the Ottoman Empire living in the United States. He was from what is today Lebanon. So people regularly call him Lebanese, but Lebanon existed as a province within the Ottoman Empire. So it's not completely wrong to say it. He was a security guard living in California. He'd been in the United States for decades, and he wanted his U.S. citizenship. But until 1952, if you were born in Asia, you were not allowed to ever become a U.S. citizen under any circumstances.
Because of the World War? Or?
No, that was part of our racism. Up until 1960s, we thought there were three races in the world: white, black, Asian.
Okay, I see.
And so we divided the world up into those pieces. After the American Civil War, we made it very clear that if you were black or white, you could be a U.S. citizen. If you were Asian, you could never be a U.S. citizen.
Asian meaning Korean, Chinese, or is it
anywhere in Asia?
Anywhere in Asia.
Anywhere in Asia.
Oh, literally Asian.
Literally Asia.
Okay.
So this poor Lebanese guy couldn't become a U.S. citizen because Lebanon's in Asia.
Exactly.
So he sued.
Poor guy.
He's like, what? This isn't fair. And so you could be an Asian and be a U.S. citizen if you were born in the U.S. because the U.S. has that. If you're born in the U.S., you are a citizen automatically rule. Yeah. So the Japanese Americans who were U.S. citizens who were interned during World War II were of Japanese descent born in the U.S. So they were natural-born U.S. citizens. They were literally eligible to be president.
Okay.
But anyway, so this Lebanese guy sues, and the court case unfolds, and he knows he's finished and he's going to lose. But so he raises his hand, and the judge calls on him, and he says, "I'd like to ask the court one more question before you rule on the case." And the judge goes, "Oh, okay, go ahead." And he goes, what was Jesus? And the judge goes, white. And the Lebanese guy goes, I'm from where Jesus is from. And the judge pounds his gavel on the bench and says, white. You are eligible to be a U.S. citizen. And that's how the guy won his citizenship. So, according to U.S. race law, if you are Arab, Persian, Turk, or Jewish, you are white.
So I'm white.
You're white. Mabruk.
Thank you. I can rule the world.
If you're black from Mauritania or the Sudan, you're white because you're Arab.
Okay, so just no. They've dug themselves in a big hole now. It's just this doesn't make sense anymore.
No.
because we know colors. Okay, so it's really about honestly, Dr. Roy. So what I'm realizing now is this all goes back to religion. As much as we try to say it's a free country, it's a free. I'm not saying that there isn't any freedom there. I'm saying that at the bottom of it is just it's a huge religious thing that is still going, covered by democracies or what have you.
Yeah.
So with that, so what I want to ask you about is now really is before we're going to get back to the World War, but I can't not ask you now the question that I have in mind, which is do they still think, like America and the West, that Islam fundamentally is a threat to civilization?
So it depends on who you talk to, obviously. If you talk to the average liberal in the United States, they'll say, no, that's ridiculous. If you talk to the average conservative, the answer is yes. Islam is a threat to humanity. And every step necessary should be taken to stop that threat. So, the second U.S. war against Iraq, there's literally no justification in the world. The first war, okay, liberate Kuwait. It's hard to argue that was wrong, although I do think the way it was executed was wrong. The U.S. intentionally targeted civilian targets in Iraq. I don't understand how that does anybody any good other than just cruelty. But in the second war, nonsense, right? There's no way to make that war make sense in anybody's head. But for the average conservative, it was necessary because Iraqis were Muslim. Now, 800,000 Iraqis were Christian. I think it's 100,000 now. So
North, right? North part of Iraq, was it?
Yeah, there was a huge Christian community. And so ironically, the U.S. dramatically reduced the percentage of Christians. But one of the goals of the Bush administration was to actually send missionaries in to Iraq.
Missionaries, back to the missionaries that we were talking about before the 1900s.
Yeah.
Send missionaries to convert Iraqis.
Yeah, there were missionaries going to Afghanistan during the Afghan war. Actually, one of the largest sources of those missions, by the way, was South Korea. Because I don't think the average person realizes this. South Korea is a Christian country. It's been converted. It's not Buddhist anymore. It's the country of neon crosses. And so a bunch of South Koreans moved to Afghanistan or trying to convert Afghans. And you're like, dude, not there. That's dangerous. You're going to get killed.
It is dangerous. And it's just because you've mentioned something about George Bush. And I'm just going to go to it now, actually. I had this written down because when he went into, let me just search Bush because it's a huge document that I have here. Yeah, there we go. So the U.S. ambassador in Baghdad, oh no, that's the second one here, Bush, yeah, preemptive war. And then there we go, yeah. So General William Jerry Boykin, one of the Pentagon's leaders, stated in 2003 that our God is stronger than the Muslim God. So Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was found to be decorating his reports to Bush with biblical quotations such as verses encouraging battle. And although this war was not directly for the protection of Israel, but in terms of that was the bottom line at the end of the day, the religion keeps coming back. In fact, yesterday, Congressman Randy Fine tweeted, "America is not and will never be a Muslim country." Why would and I'm scrolling through my timeline and I see this tweet from a congressman in the US. And I just ask myself, why is this conversation happening?
Why is this happening?
Yeah. So
the US is 1.2% Muslim. It's an impending threat.
And I just feel the responsibility now. I need to understand what he's saying. because we have a cultural role to explain stuff. But I just don't understand. Why is there a war on Islam? And it's very... I see a lot of anti-Semitism coming back, and that's bad. But I also... a lot of memories after 2001 that we want to forget about how we've been... The things that I've heard people tell my family when I travel with them in Western countries. And I remember those very well, and I was very young at the time, and I remember people yelling stuff at us. And that wasn't nice. And those little tweets makes these little things come back, and those memories come back, and it's you go somewhere wanting to explore the place and wanting to get to know people, because we have in Islam, obviously, that to get to know people. And then the verse says that's the whole point of humanity, is for us to get to know each other. And going with that spirit, we're trying to explore stuff. And then you hear all of these vulgar things being said at you. But I started realizing that those people are just products of an environment, and they're not really the threat. The threat is the people who are coming up with these policies and making those things okay for a congressman to come out and say something like trying to agitate and pick a fight with Muslims by saying America is not and will never be a Muslim country. So that's what I really want to understand, and that's a lot of things that you've been saying now, like where the white supremacy comes from, how Islam is, but I just don't understand why is it still viewed this way today with all of the media out and all of the sciences out and people getting to know each other. Why is this still there? You know?
So there's so many reasons for this. One is the United States has a horrible education system, and so there's just intentional ignorance. Another one is Americans don't travel enough. If Americans would just get in an airplane and fly to the Middle East, they will change their opinion extremely fast. Like you get into the airport, get past, depends on the country. You need to get out of the airport in Egypt. But
your mother is Egyptian, so I'm not going to say anything.
The airport in Egypt, the arrival is not a great experience. Once you're out, you will change your mind because you will discover how wonderful Arabs are. And that's it. That's all you need is travel. And I think that's true for everybody anywhere in the world. If you have a bias against any culture, you should get in an airplane and fly to that place and meet those people.
You know what? We used to care. Like right after the World Cup and what happened after the World Cup, and when Messi wore the bish,
we
just stopped caring at this point.
What was that about? I couldn't figure out why people were so angry.
It was just a huge honor.
The bish,
the prince, the emir, of Qatar, Emir Tamim putting the bish on Messi. It's like the biggest thing that you can offer anyone. And then the huge backlash.
The backlash was amazing.
And then after that, we just stopped. Before we were like, okay, try to see us the way we are now, and I think it's working. Like once we stopped caring, we've seen that a lot of people are really wanting to understand. Like these people don't care how we perceive them anymore, and we just kind of want to get on with it now and just do our own thing. If you want to see us this way, we don't care, and that to me started changing a lot of things, because once you stop caring, people will want to know why you've stopped caring. you know what I'm saying? And now they want to know why. But now with traveling and stuff, I've seen one friend that I met recently. He's from the US, first time in the Middle East. He was blown away. He was like, wow, what is this place? This is so nice. It's so safe.
That happened to Tucker Carlson. He went to UAE, and now all of a sudden his positions politically have gone flying in a different direction.
Yeah. How was living in the UAE, by the way?
I like it a lot. Yeah, it's definitely a quality of life improvement over living in Texas.
Are you living now?
We moved. We moved.
It's nice in the UAE.
It is very nice. I like being around Arab culture. One of the things that's nice about the UAE is you can be around Arab culture or whatever culture you want because it's such an international place.
Yeah. It is very international,
but
right?
Everything works, which is what's confusing to me. Like I'm used to a place where nothing works and it takes years for everything to get done. And
the government is very efficient there.
The government is extremely efficient. It pays attention to the people and what the people want. So it's very tuned into the public, where the public is going. And it's really interested in innovation and anything that pushes innovation. So it's very exciting, like just the constant, we need to improve, we need to improve, we need to improve.
It's contagious, right?
It's contagious. It's
yeah, it is contagious.
and I think the whole GCC is moving in that direction.
Yeah. Saudi Arabia definitely, Qatar as well, definitely. Kuwait is trying to move in the same direction as well now.
It's made the region very exciting in a good way, because unfortunately the region has been very exciting in a bad way too.
Yeah, exciting. That's the key word. Okay, so back to the region, World War One. Look, Doctor, we're going to try to get as much that we can get through today, and that's very important, because I really want to have you back, and I really want to have more conversations with you. And I think a lot of the things that you're saying is very eye-opening. So what happened after the World War? So they had soft power, the US, they had all of these missionaries, hospitals, schools. How did things change after World War One, and how did the US start becoming more of a hard power in the Middle East?
So the U.S. became more of an empire, period, in the world. In the aftermath of World War I, the United States ended up with a much larger share of the global economy. Because to do World War I, Germany, France, and Great Britain had to pull so much of their industry out of producing commercial goods and switch over to military. The U.S. filled that gap, and then after World War I, refused to leave that space. And the result was that all of a sudden the United States was an economic superpower. It was now one of the big players. One of the things that the United States was really keen on doing too, because, like if you ask a U.S. historian, when was oil first discovered, they might say Oil Creek, Pennsylvania, 1861. So that's completely nonsensical, because Arabs were using oil for hundreds of years prior to that. The famous Greek flame, it was a Syrian refugee who invented the flamethrower in the 7th century AD, was using oil. This idea that it was discovered in 1861 in the United States it's the equivalent of Henry Ford invented the car. No, he didn't invent the car.
I didn't know that. So I'm supposed to say yeah, but I just didn't know. So who invented the car?
Daimler.
Okay.
Yeah. A German invented. He invented the motorcycle, and then the next year he invented the car.
So it wasn't Ford?
No, Ford was working for Oldsmobile making cars when he made the Ford Motor Company.
Okay.
So it's like, how did he invent the car if he was already making them? Like, I don't understand. It's one of those things. And this is a habit the U.S. has, right? We try to take credit for things we didn't do.
That happened in science as well. Was it a U.S. thing or a Western civilization thing? Because a lot of the sciences that weren't founded in the U.S., then they called the whole equation now after that person who claims to have discovered it.
Yeah. So Eckers and Hockley, for example, for years I was taught they invented the first computer was the ENIAC in 1946, but now we know it's the Turing machine and the British did it during World War II. There's lots of... Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb. It turned out there was a British guy who beat him to it. Thomas Edison went and forced the guy to sell his company, or else he would be economically destroyed, so that Edison could claim responsibility. I know another person who thinks he's invented a bunch of things, but what he does is he buys companies today that have already invented something, and then he makes them sign non-disclosure agreements so that they won't take credit for their own inventions. We won't mention his South African name on the...
This is going to be on YouTube, so it's fine. Okay, so that's a thing, huh?
That's a thing. That's a.
So oil, when was...
So 1861, the United States found oil in the United States, in Pennsylvania.
What's the place called?
Oil Creek. And so that's another reason why it's weird that they discovered in a place that was already named Oil Creek. So the creek was...
And then the discovery.
Yeah, I wonder if there's oil by Oil Creek. Okay. Let's go and explore. So they dug a well next to the creek. The creek had that, when oil floats on water and the light hits it and it's iridescent and it has all the different colors.
Yeah.
That's how it got its name. People were like, look, there's oil on the top of this creek. So they dug a well next to it and they hit oil. And so that started the U.S. oil industry. By the end of World War I, the United States realized that it needed to start looking for oil in places outside the United States. And by the 1920s, there was starting to be interest in Saudi Arabia. By the 1930s, Caltex, a U.S. company, actually moved into Saudi Arabia and began working on oil exploration. And the reason the United States liked this was because the British had already gone in that direction.
Kuwait, right?
Kuwait is the starting point for the British, because the British realized there had to be a way to figure out where the oil was other than just walking and looking at your feet, because the earth was just too big to...
That's how they used to look for it.
That's exactly how you used to look for oil, is you just looked at your feet, and if you if you're lucky, you stepped in it, because there was so much oil on the planet, it could literally be on the surface. But usually you're just looking for black shale or black sandstone, because they're spongy rocks. They'll absorb the oil and turn black. So what the British did was they went through the historical record, and they're like, look, there's all these references to oil in the Middle East. There must be oil there.
So let's go explore.
So they move into Kuwait, carve it out of the Ottoman Empire with the expressed point of using it as their point of reference, and then they find it originally in Iran. And they're so excited. And little did they know they were actually on top of it.
Yeah, so they used to export the oil in the early 1900s. Obviously, they had to do deals, and then Kuwait stepped out of that deal. I think in the early 1970s when they kept the whole oil. But before that, there was a deal with the Brits, and the Brits had that similar deal in Iran, which was like 40-60, was it? Or
no, it was 84-16.
80, which is nothing.
Yeah, the Iranians were getting 16%. You're like, wait, it's your oil. At least do 50-50.
I think we got a better deal, I think. So, so with that said, how did they used to export the oil? Because now we have, I don't know, it might be a very detailed question, but I always thought, like, how did they export the oil? Was there tubes? How did they ship it?
Yeah, they put it in barrels and put it on ships.
Literally. And then now they just became more efficient at it in terms of...
Yeah, we're just so much more efficient now.
Yeah. Okay, so, but they found out that oil was very important after the First World War.
So the British figured out that oil was going to change the world by the end of the 19th century. The United States was slower to it because the United States had so much oil. When the British panicked and then made the move on Kuwait, the reason they did it was there were only really two oil companies left on the planet by that point, Standard Oil and Royal Dutch Shell. Shell had been a British company, but when Royal Dutch bought Shell, Royal Dutch ended up owning 51%. So it was a Dutch company with a British minority share. So the British wanted their own separate company, which is why they ended up creating...
BP. Was it BP?
Yeah, it was originally called Anglo-Persian Oil Company, but then it became BP.
Okay. So because there was no more economic interest in the Middle East, and the power that the US had, they said, now we want to get properly involved where we have more resources and trade, back to the first reason why they wanted to go out of the US and try to look for trade outside the US. So am I interpreting things correctly?
Oh, absolutely. The United States is a merchant state. Its goal is to figure out a way to sell you something.
Yeah.
Now, not anymore. The United States doesn't make anything, but that was the goal then, was we're going to make it and we're going to sell it to you. We don't know what it is you want necessarily, but that's our goal.
So the US was very similar to how China is today.
Yeah. The US was the original China in a way, right? It was... We're going to just build factories. We're going to pay people almost nothing because they're going to pour in as immigrants, and we'll make products that we can sell to the rest of the world.
So between World War I and they really started getting involved after World War II, and also the UN. And we're going to talk about Israel a little bit. But with that said, did they make a lot of... Because right at the beginning of the World War II, it was right at the end of the Great Depression in the US.
Yes.
And no one really connects the dots. Or is there a dot connected there? Did they make money out of the World War?
So the reason why the Depression happened was capitalism had failed. And the reason capitalism failed was the industry had become so good. So when Great Britain, France, and Germany decided to massacre each other wholesale in World War I, and they retooled their industry, then the United States stepped in. When the war ended, the British, the French, and the Germans went, okay, now we're going to start making coats and shoes and cars again. Get out. And the United States said, no, we're here, we're staying.
We're comfortable.
And so everybody went, all right, fine. And there sort of became like an arms race in manufacturing. where everybody was making as many refrigerators as they could and as many washing machines as they could and as many cars as they could and as many coats as they could. And what happened then was you couldn't sell your product for a profit anymore. That's what caused the Great Depression. People think the stock market crashed. That's nonsensical. The stock market isn't enough of a segment of the economy that it crashing would ever take the economy out.
Okay.
And the stock market is like a symptom, not the disease. The disease was productivity was through the roof. The quality of the goods were amazing. So I could buy a refrigerator and know it's going to last 20, 30 years. So, and if I do have a problem, it's cheap to repair. So I'm not going to go buy a new refrigerator. And so the economy then somehow manages to survive this nightmare for 10 years. And finally in 1929, the investors in the stock market panic because they know they're sitting on top of a Ponzi scheme, that this thing is only working because by investing money in the stock market, you're giving those companies that aren't making a profit, you're giving them money. And as soon as they got to the point where they're like, I don't think this is sustainable, they panicked, began selling, it crashed, and there was nothing then to prop up these corporations that hadn't made a profit in 10 years. So that's why they go under. So World War II happens. The reason why, so people make the really weird claim that wars are good for economies. They're awful.
Are they?
Yeah. Every war in history has triggered a recession or a depression without fail.
You could speak to the conspiracy theorists.
Yeah. If you want to wreck the global economy, war is a great way to do it. The estimates are that the U.S.'s second war against Iraq took out $10 trillion from the global economy.
From the global economy?
From the global economy.
Okay, so it doesn't just affect the two countries that are going into war.
It affects everybody because we trade with each other.
So, but the question here is, wasn't the U.S. making money from the European war, which is World War II, European /
So World War II was good for the global economy.
Was good?
Yeah, it's the exception to the rule.
Oh, wow.
And it's the one that everybody points to and goes, look, wars are good for the economy. No, there's one time that this is true. And 65 million people died to make that true. It's not worth it. Like, find a different method for making your economy good. The reason why it worked is it blew up all those surplus goods. We took all those things that were flooding the economy, causing the price of things to go down, and literally blew them up. And then we began producing goods that would get blown up, like bombs and airplanes and tanks.
So they would want more of them.
So we just literally destroyed the surplus slack in the economy, creating false scarcity.
Okay, so that's what's happened. So they destroyed the supply. And created the demand.
And well, the demand already existed. You're just destroying the supply.
Yeah.
And now that drives the prices back up. Now you're making profits again. So the United States' great fear after World War II is we would end up back in the Great Depression at some point, because at some point we'd become productive enough again where we would do this. In other words, this was the socialist dream, where we finally produced so much that we could basically make everything free for everybody. Yeah, it's not technically free, right? You still have to pay for it, but the cost to manufacture it was higher than the price you're paying for it. So you're coming out ahead. And the United States desperately didn't want socialism to take over the world. So we created mechanisms to prevent that, like, for example, creating planned obsolescence. That refrigerator isn't going to last 30 years, it'll last 5. And we've designed it on purpose to break. And then we've designed it to break in such a way that it's too expensive to repair it. You just might as well replace it.
That's why I never update my old iPhones.
Yeah, exactly. That's planned. That's actually planned sabotage, because they actually install malware on your phone.
Like once you start updating those 2-3-year-old iPhones,
yeah,
they just never work.
I mean, it's beyond planned obsolescence at that point. That's just...
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so it's a thing for capitalism, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. So that became the driving force behind the U.S. economy. And of course, the Chinese are experts at making stuff that doesn't last. So this is why capitalism as it's structured today is a really awful idea in a world where we're overheating and we're running out of resources. stop. It's time to start making quality goods again. But to do that, you would probably need to have serious government interference in the economy, and the rich aren't going to tolerate that.
Are you a communist, Dr. Roy? so yeah, but
I'm
look,
part Swedish.
you're part- so, you know what? I really like how Norway and like the Scandinavian countries are run. They have a pretty solid economy, and from what I've learned, I haven't really took a deep dive into them, but from what I've been seeing and indicators, they're doing really well for themselves. And we run through the company, we run other programs, and one of the programs, and we did the research on the Scandinavian jails and stuff, and I just really like the way they think. And we're also running another research on their education, and they just think in a way where they're trying to really develop and try to build sustainable models good for everyone.
Exactly.
And it's fair.
It's fair.
It's fair, right?
Yeah.
But coming back to post World War, there's going to be the UN. We need to talk about Israel because it's like the elephant in the room, and we need to address that. But we also need to address the slow growth of communism / socialism, and partly in Egypt. Would you say it's more or less socialism with the national, like Abdel-Nasser? So that war between capitalism, communism, socialism, and where Israel is in this whole equation. What happened after the World War? Because we know the UN was founded in 1945 in the US. So now that's a huge statement that the US is the biggest superpower. And then in 1948, when Israel declared the country, minutes after, the US was the first to declare Israel as a country. So speak to me about this whole situation, this whole dynamic of things that started growing post World War II.
Yeah, so the world feels enormous guilt over the Holocaust, and it should. It's worth pointing out that the United States never once bombed any facilities related to the Holocaust. We claim we didn't know. That is nonsense. We completely knew. I've seen a picture of Auschwitz from the National Archive, and it's an aerial photograph. So somebody flew an airplane over and snapped a photo, and they labeled everything. So clearly they knew what was going on, to the point where they knew this is the gas chamber. This is, where they're burning the bodies. So this idea that they didn't know is a lie. So in the aftermath of World War II, and, we were turning away refugees. There were Jewish refugees trying to escape Europe, and the United States and Great Britain were sending them back into Europe. And, many of them died. The most famous is the St. Louis, which was a ship that was coming, and the United States redirected it to Cuba and then sent most of the passengers back to Germany. And that's,
wow.
They tracked how many of them died in the Holocaust as a result. It's why we created the treaty that we have on refugees for the world. It was created in 1952. And I'm questioning it because
that's the one that they're talking about.
Yeah, the St. Louis.
Yeah.
The idea is you can't turn refugees away ever again, because we didn't want there to ever be another situation where refugees were being sent to their death.
Oh, so that's why you can't send refugees away now internationally?
Yes.
Because of what happened in St. Louis?
The St. Louis is one of the ships that we turned around and sent back.
Interesting.
It's the most famous case, I think, in the United States of refugees being sent back. 2/3 of Americans polled said they didn't want Jewish refugees coming to the United States because they feared that they would be Nazi spies. So it's the same exact kind of rhetoric you hear today about immigrants going to the United States.
Because they would be like Hamas people inside, or whatever.
I mean, it's this paranoia that somehow immigrants, for a country of colonists, settler colonial enterprise, it's amazing how anti-immigrant they are.
They are.
Yeah. Like, I have a
anti-immigrant.
cousin who, was going off, I don't like what immigrants are doing to the United States. And I'm like, dude, your grandfather was an immigrant. Like, what are you talking about? And then I asked him, I will respond to this in a more appropriate way once you've told it to me in the original Cherokee.
Yeah, that was a difficult question for him. Okay, so but I would like to track before the Balfour what is it called? Declaration was it, right? So that was in 1918, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
So before that, and then that was before the Holocaust.
Yes, way before the Holocaust.
Yeah, and then so how that presence was slowly building, and how did the Holocaust help indirectly or directly in the foundation of Israel? And those little dynamics, because we have our narrative. Like, I'm not asking this question and I do not know the answer. I know the answer from what we've researched here from this part of the world. But how is this really viewed from the Western side? I want to understand, because once we research, we always hit a wall where it just doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
So I'd like to understand what's behind this wall.
Okay, so to do that, we need to go back to Zionism, the birth of Zionism.
Okay.
The father of Zionism is Theodor Herzl. He was a Jewish Austrian who, the camel that broke the straw that broke the camel's back. I almost said it the other way around. I'm doing this on purpose. I'm using that horrible, because it's Palestine, right?
Yeah.
That moment, strangely enough, wasn't a pogrom. It wasn't the regular sort of built-in violence that the Jews had been experiencing. It was a situation where a Jewish German officer in the French army.
Jewish German officer in the French army.
Yeah.
Okay.
His last name was Dreyfus. He was accused by France for being a spy for Germany. And he was scapegoated and sent to prison. I don't remember if he was executed or not, but I know he was definitely found guilty. And so Herzl went, that's it. There's no place in Europe for Jews, because Jews will never be equals in European society. Now, what's interesting to me is he could have just as easily said there's no place for Germans in the French army, because it could also be that the French, don't get me wrong, I totally believe the French are anti-Semitic. I'm just saying that it's entirely possible also they were just anti-German.
Yeah, as well. Yeah.
And so, here's this Jewish German officer in the French army, and they're like zapping him because he was easy pickings. Herzl then creates the idea of Zionism, and what he wants is a Jewish state outside of Europe. He didn't want it to be in Palestine. He specifically was looking elsewhere. One of the places he was looking at was Uganda, which isn't fair for the Ugandans. So I'm not saying that would have been a better solution. I'm just saying that his initial response wasn't...
And Brazil, I think, or was it somewhere in South America?
Yeah, I think... And also at one point they were looking at New Mexico and Arizona. There was lots of different options.
So
Australia.
he just wanted somewhere outside of Europe.
Somewhere outside of Europe. And he specifically didn't want Palestine. As his movement grew, the majority of Ashkenazi members that were in the Jewish European community that were in his Zionist movement began to say, no, it has to be Palestine. We're going home. We're going back to our home. Here's the tragedy in that moment. I totally support that. Why not go home? You're Jewish, you want to be in Palestine. Wonderful. Yeah. The problem isn't Jews being in Palestine. The problem was it was going to be at the expense of the already existing population, that the Christian and Muslim populations living in Palestine had to be expelled in some way. Because really early on, the Zionists set their goal on 80% Jewish.
Oh, so they wanted 80% Jewish.
They wanted 80% Jewish because they felt 1/5 of the population being Arab, if there was a rebellion or an uprising, it would be easily put down. It was a way for them to establish control. In other words, they were thinking like U.S. settler colonial project, or the South African settler colonial, or the Australian settler. They were taking...
Because they just don't know better. That's what they've learned.
Maybe it was just in that moment they're thinking... Arabs are subhuman. We can deal with them however we want to. It doesn't matter.
It's a cycle, right?
It's a cycle. It's a cycle of one person putting another person into a subhuman position, which is ironic because that's exactly what the Europeans were doing to the Jews. And then now the Jews are turning around and doing it to the Palestinians. So that's what they set upon doing. Sykes-Picot happens. The British and the French draw up a map for the Middle East where they're going to carve up the Ottoman Empire and Persia.
That was during the First World War.
This is during the First World War. So this is after Theodor Herzl creates Zionism. And in the process, the British, they give Istanbul to Russia, and then northern Iran will go to Russia, southern Iran will go to the British Empire, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon will go to France, and then Jordan, Palestine will go to England. The Izmir area will go to Greece, and the Antalya area will go to Italy. That was the plan. And the Russians have a communist revolution. They pull out, so which means they're not going to go into Istanbul, and it also means they're not going to take northern Iran. So the British are upset because they can't take south if the Russians don't take north. They have to divide and conquer Iran. So they tell the French, sorry, we lost southern Iran, so Iraq is ours. And that's how we ended up with the configuration that we ended up with. And then the French thought a way to solve a lot of problems with the Turks was to actually give a piece of Syria to Turkey. So like Antioch should be part of Syria. It's historically part of Syria.
Just give it to Turkey.
Yeah, they just gave it to Turkey.
But I thought northern Iran was because of the Americans, where after the war they said we can't. Oh no!
You're thinking World War II.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I got mixed up.
Yes.
So that was after World War One. Okay.
Yeah.
So keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So that's in the background. In 1920, so in 1918, the Arabs actually create a state. The rebel Arabs create a state out of the Ottoman Empire that included Western Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, and King Faisal I becomes the king of that state. His capital was in Damascus. The flag he flew was almost exactly like the Palestinian Jordanian flag. It's just the black and white stripes were flipped. In 1920, the French invade through Lebanon, and they fight the Battle of Maysalun and defeat his army, and then take Syria and Lebanon out of his state. And of course, then the English make a deal with the Saudis so they can get Western Saudi Arabia. And then the English move into Palestine and Jordan. And then they tell King Faisal, hey, you're unemployed, we hear. And he's like, yeah. And they go, do you want to be king of Iraq? And he goes, I guess. And so
that's how you come.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he got the consolation prize.
Because that was
Iraq.
in the early 1920s.
That was 1920 when they did this. And then Baghdad went into a state of uprising and the British bombed it.
We did the whole episode on the history of Iraq since the 1920s.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, well, I'll send
Amazing.
it to you. I think it's subtitled as well.
Okay, cool.
With an Iraqi historian. He's very liberal, I would say. So he spoke about all sides of the story. You'll
very
enjoy
cool.
it. Yeah. So yeah, so that happened then.
Yes. So in the process, there was a French general named Gouraud. I don't remember his first name. And he went to Salahuddin's tomb and he kicked it. And he said, we're back, Salahuddin. So in other words, Europeans have gone out of their way to say that the carving up of the Ottoman Empire wasn't a new crusade, when it is 100% that it was a new crusade. It was in their mind, to the point where a French general kicked Salahuddin's tomb and said, we're back.
Even General Allenby, when he first walked into...
Yeah.
That was a very huge symbolism. That's him, huh?
Yeah. Henri, okay. Giroud.
So even when trying to find where Allenby, the British general, when he, after 4 centuries of Ottoman rule, when they first went to Jerusalem, and they staged it in a way where it's very symbolized.
Yes.
You'd think it's just people who are just going to take some land and they're going to colonize it.
No.
But just like how he said when he kicked, I didn't know about this story, kicking the grave and saying we're back, or the tomb, and saying that we're back, or walking in a way where it's staged in a way where you're sending a message.
Yeah.
So how does that even relate to Zionism?
Yeah, so it creates this duality, because in the hearts of the British, Richard the Lionheart never captured Jerusalem. They've done it. They've succeeded in doing what Richard the Lionheart couldn't do. And so in their mind, they fix this error, right? Salahuddin had successfully stopped the English from capturing Jerusalem in the Crusades. And now all of a sudden they've done it. At the same time, Balfour then issues this declaration, hey, we're going to create a Jewish-only state. And so the British government initially is like, no. We finally got this prize. We've been
they didn't want to do it.
They didn't want to do it. And so they actually canceled Balfour. They were like, no, this is not on the table. We're not going to do it. And they began the mandate, and they began minting coins where it said Palestine, and they minted it in Arabic, Hebrew, and English. And the British initial goal was I think in their hearts, they were going to rule the empire forever. They didn't know this thing was going to end. Right? The sun never sets on the British Empire. Well, apparently it did set. And so I think they were thinking, we're going to rule this thing forever. How do we create this multi-ethnic state? Especially because Jews are, as part of this Zionist movement, moving into Palestine. And of course, the Zionism then becomes this violent event where the Zionists begin actually doing terrorism in Palestine, including attacking British military positions in the 1920s and 30s, attacking hotels. So once that starts to happen, the British now find themselves in this really weird situation where, on the one hand, they've got a Zionist movement in England. On the other hand, this is their dream. They have Jerusalem finally. They fulfill the Crusader dream.
Who's the founder of Israel, the first president? Ben-Gurion, right?
Yes, Ben-Gurion.
He was a terrorist at the time, right?
Yeah. Yitzhak Shamir was actually sent to Uganda at one point by the British government because they captured him and they were like, dude, we're done with your terrorism. Go hang out in Uganda.
But at the same time, we had Dr. Salman Abu Sittah. He wrote this book. Atlas Palestine, the Atlas of Palestine. I'll show you this book. It's an amazing book.
Okay.
It has all the maps of Palestine.
Wow.
You need to see this.
It's
amazing, right?
Yeah.
And I'll try to find you a copy because there aren't many copies, and I might give you this copy actually. But he came. I think he's in his 80s. Bless him. He was born in what used to be Palestine in the 30s, and he spoke about the stories. And one of the stories that he spoke about is Churchill came to Palestine at some point, spoke to his uncle and said, we're going to give you Palestine. But from what they know is they were empowering those groups like the Haganah and giving them weapons and taking all the weapons from the Palestinians. And Churchill, I think, came after the revolution. I think the revolution or the rebellion or they tried to do an uprising between 36 and 39 was in Palestine. And after that, they promised them that they're not going to give Palestine to the Brits. Promised the Palestinians that they will not give Palestine away.
Yeah.
And that's what made them stop. After that, the attacks, I think, started happening from the Jewish terrorist groups, and one being Ben-Gurion and other groups. So that's the confusion that was happening there. So the confusion is you're clearly giving weapons to the Haganah. You're bringing in refugees which were World War I survivors, and people with experience, knew how to handle weapons. A lot of them were ex-military, and they were just recruiting them into Palestine. So how did the Brits and the West, how did they? So now we perceive it this way.
Yeah.
Right? Like we see this clearly. How was that justified and perceived and covered in the Western culture?
I think the driving force was the Ashkenazi, so the Jewish Europeans, were seen as white. They were off-white. They're like Italians. Italians are seen as off-white. They're not quite white, but close enough. And then compared to the Arabs, they were much whiter. So there was definitely a white component to this. I think also the British realized they were probably going to fail in stopping the Zionist state from being created. So I think in their mind, the consolation prize was, okay, we can't stop the Zionist state from being created, but we can stop Palestine from being created. We'll get 50% success instead of 100. And so they did really interesting, deliberate things. Like you're saying, there was definitely weapons going to Israeli terrorist organizations. Another interesting thing that they did was during World War II, they actually created a Palestine brigade, but they only allowed Jews into the Palestine brigade. The Palestinians who volunteered to fight in the war were turned into stevedores. So they were the guys who loaded and unloaded ships. So the Palestinians saw no combat, whereas the Jews did see combat. And as a result, they had the experience, the military experience, to do their invasion in 1948, whereas the Palestinians didn't have the military experience to do any kind of defense. And so in a way, the British allowed for, or even set up, the Zionist success
Or
And
to strengthen them.
yeah.
And make the Palestinians weaker. So what were they expecting? So was it towards the end were they really trying to balance things out, or were they in a position where
I think the British gave up on Zionism.
That's it.
They just wanted to block Palestine.
that's it?
They in their hearts, they wanted to block both because I think if they could still own Jerusalem today, they would.
Oh, okay. So that's the bottom of it, is that they wanted to own it.
They wanted to own it. This was the fulfillment of their Crusader dream that they had pulled off. Richard and Salahuddin signed the treaty in 1192. So, here it is. It's 1920 and they finally have Jerusalem. They finally pulled it off. And now they're starting to realize by World War II, we're probably not going to keep it, at least part of it. So then what can we do? And I think their thought was, okay, we'll accept that there's going to be an Israel, but there doesn't have to be a Palestine.
Oh, so they just don't like.
They can't
Okay.
stop both, so they'll just stop one.
But they want to stop. They want to stop Palestine because obviously the Israelis, they're white. Can we just say? Is it like because they're closer to us as a civilization? They have blue eyes.
Yeah,
We like them more.
there's that for sure. Another thing is the British love to divide and conquer. So, what they told India, you can go independent, but we're going to have to split you in two.
Pakistan.
When they invaded the Hausa part of Africa, they told the French, you take the north, we take the south. When they were doing Sykes-Picot, you take the Russians, you take northern Iran, we'll take southern Iran, right?
So divide and conquer is an actual strategy, or was it realized then?
It is the British playbook. We're going to go in, we're going to split you in two, and now you have to work against two empires. Good luck. And so I think in their mind, if we could at least hinder the Palestinian state, then we've sort of divided and conquered. And, strangely enough, Jordan annexed the West Bank and Egypt annexed the Gaza Strip. So they really pulled it off, especially because I think they were thinking they were going to hold on to Egypt and Jordan in some manner going forward. So in a way, they still had Jerusalem because Jerusalem's now in Jordan. And at least East Jerusalem, right?
Yeah.
The new Jerusalem that the Israelis are creating, okay, we don't care about that anyway. It's the historical one that they wanted.
Yeah. So how did the US get involved and because it's a British thing so far,
Yeah.
right? Like the US aren't even involved.
No.
How did they get involved?
So I think the U.S. got captured by Zionism in the Democratic Party. And then, of course, it expanded to the Republican Party. Both parties are captured by it. But during the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration, so even before there's an Israel, one of the reasons why no infrastructure during the Holocaust was bombed in World War II is that the United States wanted to make sure that the Holocaust was as bad as possible. And the reason is because they wanted to make sure that there was enough international support for the creation of Israel. So if, I don't understand this calculus. It seems to me that if 2 million Jews had died, it's just as horrific as 5 million Jews dying, right? I don't think our mind differentiates between 2 and 5 million.
No.
So this was a strange calculation on
They
their
just
part.
wanted more Jews to die.
They just wanted more Jews to die. But interestingly enough, there were Jewish Zionists who were part of this. That was part of this strategy. And one of the things that Ben-Gurion kept saying is, European Jews are old Jews. We want the exciting, energetic Jews. We want the American Jews. And so there was this sort of weird anti-Semitism that had filtered into even the Jewish community that was Zionist. To believe that Zionism made sense, you had to buy the anti-Semitic argument that there was no place for Jews in Europe and the United States. So Zionism is built on anti-Semitism. It's just, supposedly it's the remedy for it, but in reality it's just the extension, to the point where Adolf Eichmann actually sent representatives to Lebanon in I don't remember the year, it was in the early 40s during World War II, and met with representatives of Lehi, one of the Jewish terrorist organizations, to discuss the expulsion of Jewish Europeans to Palestine. It was to the point where the Zionists in Palestine were willing to work with the Nazis.
Because we hear these stories, and when people, those stories are almost like,
How?
we hear those stories, and when you're like almost not allowed to talk about those stories in the Western media.
Oh yeah, absolutely not, because it exposes the absurdity of the whole project. There was no reason to create an Israel. You could have just created a secular Palestine and built in safeguards for the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim populations, and let as many Jews as wanted to, who had the money to buy land, move to Palestine.
Yeah.
What's the problem with that? There's nothing wrong with that. Nobody in the world would have been angry by that. No. In fact, the Palestinians were opening their doors and letting Jewish refugees into their homes, and were living with Jewish families. And because the Palestinians did the same for Armenians too, by the way. So the Palestinians saw, this is the horrificness of it. They were welcoming the Jewish families, not realizing that there was an agenda, that there was a plan, and they were not on the good side of this plan.
Yeah. So there was a plan from Ben Gurion as well, the 1 million Jewish plan, to bring 1 million people.
Yeah.
1 million Jewish people into Palestine. Part of the plan to be able to have some form of a majority.
Right.
So the US, and Truman here really comes into play, right? Because that's after the World War. Truman became president towards the end of the Second World War, was it?
Yeah.
He's the one who did the, was it him? The Hiroshima?
He's the one who drops the nukes.
Drops the nukes, yeah. So he came in towards the end of the Second World War.
Right, he comes in April 45.
Was he supported by a Zionist movement that put him as president? Did he have a relationship with him? Because there was something really that we found during our research. Truman had some Zionists.
He was definitely a Zionist.
And he kind of associated himself with a historical figure from, was it Persia or Baratimono? Yeah, so he said that he's the equivalent of that person who paved the way.
Is it Cyrus the Great?
Cyrus? Was it Cyrus is it in English? Baluch or Barus? I'm not sure. It's just something
Kurosh.
weird. Kurosh.
Yeah, Cyrus the Great in English.
That's the one, huh?
Kurosh, yeah.
Kurosh. So he said, I am Kurosh.
Yeah.
Have you come across this literature?
I think I've actually heard him say or seen this before, yeah.
So he said that I am Kurosh.
I'm freeing the Jews from captivity.
Yeah, who's Kurosh?
So Kurosh was the guy who created the Hachameneshi Empire in the 6th century BC, so the 500s. He created a Bill of Rights, and we actually have 2 copies. One is in Elami, and the other one is in Aramaic. And to bring Truman home, if you go to the UN building, above the front door, in 6 different languages, is Kurosh's Bill of Rights. It's in English, Russian, Arabic, Persian, Spanish, and maybe Chinese.
Why is he so important?
He wrote the world's first ever Bill of Rights.
That's it.
Yeah, and in it he did really amazing things, including freedom of religion.
Okay.
He banned human sacrifice, which I think is just generally a good idea.
It is.
I'm totally in favor.
Especially when you're hungry.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm willing to make exceptions.
But yeah, so so now I know what you mean when you say Bill of Rights, because to me Bill of Rights is just almost like so it was the first Bill of Rights.
First Bill of Rights ever.
Okay.
And that freedom of religion wasn't you're free to worship, go, good luck. It was the state will maintain and build your temples. So we will, if you have a temple that's in disrepair, we will rebuild it for you. We will fix it, because Kurosh believed diversity was amazing. He wanted the different nations in his empire to express their own religion, have their own culture, have their own languages. He wanted to celebrate diversity. It's bizarre. So when he conquered the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Neo-Babylonians had been at war in Palestine. They had conquered it. And the Jewish people didn't submit. They kept throwing rocks at the Babylonians. And so the Babylonians got really mad, and they forced a portion of the Jewish population to move to their capital, Babylon. And they didn't enslave the Jews. I mean, there were Jewish slaves for sure, but they didn't enslave that population they brought from Palestine. They just mandated that they couldn't leave Babylon. So that's why it's called captivity, and not slavery. And so when Kurosh conquered the Neo-Babylonians, he goes, there's no captivity, and there's no slavery in my empire, no captivity. You're free to do whatever you want. And then he said, but I really like you guys. I think you have an amazing culture. if some of you are willing to, I would love for you to move to Esfahan. And so a portion of the Jewish population moved to Esfahan. The rest of them mostly went. Some stayed in Babylon forever, basically, and then a big chunk of them moved back to Palestine. And when they got back to Palestine, the Neo-Babylonian Empire had pulled down the Temple of Solomon to punish the Jews.
Yeah.
And so they said, "Are you serious that you'll rebuild our temple?" And the Persians were like, "Yeah, absolutely. This Bill of Rights." And so they handed plans that they had exaggerated, which included building a human-made mesa, a massive mesa, and then putting the second Temple of Solomon on top of it. And so the Persians actually paid for it. They brought in Egyptian engineers, because Egyptians can build mountains, and they built the Temple Mount, and then they built the temple on top of it with Persian gold.
I want to come back to that temple and the importance of that temple in today's situation. So Munira helped me find the passage. So after the end of his term, which is Truman, when his friend Rabbi Eddie Jacobson introduced him to a group of Jewish clergymen at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York in 1953, and said that he was the man who helped establish Israel, he corrected them with the emotion, saying, "What do you mean helped? I'm Cyrus." By this, Truman linked himself to the Persian king Cyrus the Great, so Kurosh, who allowed the Jews to return from exile and rebuild the temple. So Truman, at the time, he became the president right towards the end of the Second World War. How did that affect the Zionist movement? So all the pieces started coming together.
Yeah.
Where did they start coming together by any chance? Because all of the little things that were happening everywhere in the world just seemed like there's a big plan around it. Like the conspiracy theorists would think that. But obviously, Truman's position at the time was very important for the Zionist movement to establish Israel, correct?
Absolutely.
So how did he help?
I mean, one of the things was having the United States vote yes in the UN.
Just for that,
Yeah.
Just the little things that they needed the U.S. on.
Exactly. The British, by the way, abstained. They didn't vote yes or no. So
In 1948,
in 1947, when the UN had the vote.
like the first vote.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the British abstained. The U.S. voted yes.
That's the 45% vote.
Exactly. Where they're splitting Palestine, not quite 50-50. And then, but that's obviously not what ended up happening. But that's how the UN voted. So Truman, had his plan. His big issue was contain the Soviet Union. One of the things the United States realized in World War II, but probably they were figuring out before, but definitely by World War II, was that if there was a boogeyman, somebody that could kind of scare your public, you could use fear to motivate the public. So we had decided that we were going to turn the Soviet Union into the boogeyman. And so either 48 or 49, we created NATO. And the Soviet Union actually applied.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. And Truman had to explain to Stalin, no, we made NATO to be against you. And Stalin was like, why? We're best friends. We just fought World War II together.
Yeah.
Why would you do this? And Truman said, oh, and by the way, if you don't get out of northern Iran, we're going to nuke you. And Stalin's like, dude, you went to the nuke so quickly. We'll pull out. Jeez. And so,
I just pulled out.
yeah, so Truman is setting up this hostility because he wants to create the Cold War. And
He needs an antagonist.
he needs an antagonist, and Stalin is perfect for it. He played the part really well, and because he's so awful, right? I mean, he just awful personality, and he has an awful track record. And one of the things the United States is really keen on is becoming the good guy, because you have to remember we still have apartheid in the United States. It's segregation. The Dutch word for segregation is apartheid.
Yeah.
So when South Africa does it, by the way, South African government that's voted into office to create apartheid was voted in 1948. So 1948 is a really fascinating year because two apartheid states are created in the same year, the same moment. And you would think after World War II, we would have been past that. We would have learned from Nazi
Because there was a
Germany.
Roosevelt-Churchill agreement that the right to declare, what did they call it? Like
Self-determination?
Self-determination. And that was very important because that's what they wanted to come out of the Second World. You'd think that they would be right to self-determination and no more occupation or colonialism.
Right.
So I just wanted to add that little detail.
So Woodrow Wilson actually was the guy originally pushing for this right of self-determination. He didn't mean non-whites. He only meant for white nations. So he wanted Poland to be created, because you got to remember, before World War I, there was no Poland. Prussia, Austria, and Russia had carved it up. Russia owned Warsaw. So at the end of World War I, in 1917, when the Russians surrendered, they gave up Poland to Germany. And so at the end of World War I, Poland was carved out of Germany and Austria. And the idea was self-determination. They weren't going to Congo and freeing the Congolese from Belgian rule, right? Like this was just Poland. So when when Roosevelt and Churchill are talking about this, they don't even mean it. Churchill had sat down with Stalin at one point, and they whipped out a napkin, and they wrote down the names of Eastern European states, Greece, Romania, Yugoslavia, and then they put percentages next to it. So I don't remember the exact percentages, but I think like Greece was 80% Britain, 20% Soviet Union. Yugoslavia would be like 60% Soviet Union, 40% Britain. In other words, this idea of self-determination, they didn't mean it. They were carving up the world on napkins.
So they just think of other nations as resources.
Exactly. I mean, think about the border of Jordan. So, Churchill's got a crayon and a napkin, and he's drawing, and all of a sudden he sneezes, and there's this weird little jog in the Jordan-Iraq border, and you're like, what is that? What is it for? What purpose did it have? And of course, they just played it off. Oh, I meant to do that. They're like Adam in the Garden of Eden, renaming everything. They're just drawing new borders for everybody. And the whole goal, always, every step of the way, is divide and conquer.
So when they looked at this region, in their heads, how did they perceive them? Did they perceive them as less of human beings?
Yeah, uncivilized, backwards, and probably subhuman. I mean, you also have to remember that anti-Semitism, Arabs are Semites. So even though initially the term was meant specifically for the Jewish people, it was pretty quick that they realized, yeah, we also mean Arabs too.
But sorry to cut you off, but if you go back a little bit, before the whole Western development and let's say modern civilization, before that, they knew that Arabs were pretty much civilized, and they did a lot of things. And
the Arabs invented civilization.
Yes.
Egypt and Iraq invented civilization.
How are they able to look at this in that way as well?
Yeah.
Just ignorance, or?
No, they know. Look, if you take a Western civilization course in a college in the United States, the first week or two, depending on the professor, covers Egypt and Iraq. They accept that Egypt and Iraq invented Western civilization. In their minds, then, the Greeks and the Romans take it to a new level, and then the British and the French bring it to its pinnacle. Okay. And so, those poor backwards Arabs created it, but they didn't know what to do with it. And then they just delete the Islamic Golden Age and don't mention the fact that the Arabs invented the scientific method and
so the Islamic Golden Age, by its essence and spirit, is a threat to Western, like to be inspired by it even in the Western civilization.
Yeah, I mean, Ibn al-Haytham did the scientific method 600 years before Francis Bacon, and he's not giving credit. Ibn al-Haytham stated that light had a finite speed, that it traveled in waves. That was 1,000 years ago he figured this out. Ibn Sina talks about necessary being, and I don't want to go into the philosophy of it because it's going to take a long time, but basically he says as time goes forward, information increases. Well, that's the definition of entropy. But then he said, what happens if you take the whole universe backwards? He said, the entire universe becomes a tiny packet of information. That packet of information has just enough information that the universe can unfold from it.
Big Bang theory.
Big Bang. 1,000 years ago. And so, modern agriculture was invented somewhere between 750 and 800 in the Arab world. It's the Arab agricultural revolution. Ibn Sina created modern medicine. This is the 1000th anniversary of the canon of medicine this year. So we're 1,000 years into it.
And the Greek philosophy, if it wasn't for the Arabs who translated it, right?
We would have lost it.
We would have lost it, right?
The Arabs preserved it, and they built upon it. They were reading Aristotle.
Today we think of Arabs that they do not know how to preserve anything, right? And preserving one of the most like important things ever to be created by mankind, and the Greek philosophy and what people built on it. Just makes even like Arabs have been affected by this way of thinking.
It absolutely. I'm hoping this is the Arab Renaissance that we're in right now. Now, it's hard to imagine sometimes when you look at the condition that Syria and Yemen and Libya and Sudan are
Because
in.
we're in the bubble now.
We're in a...
Because you can't see it from outside. Like, I hope as well.
Yeah. And the reason I'm saying that is because I think Arabs have lost touch with philosophy and poetry and storytelling. And it's a catastrophe when you think about the philosophers and the poetry that came out of the Arab world and the storytelling that came out of the world. Like, how did this happen? Well, but the same was true for Europe. They called it the Dark Ages because I guess the sun went away and they stopped producing literature and they stopped producing science. Apparently, every civilization has to go through this at some point.
Cycle.
It's a cycle. And I think what we need to remember is all human beings are equally worthless. There's no one civilization that's better than the next.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And instead of being like in this situation where I hate that group and I hate that group, we need to realize we're kind of all muddling through, doing the best we can at any given moment. And some of us do have bad ideas, but hopefully in the exchange of ideas, some of those bad ideas will kind of get at least rounded off. You know what I mean? And we don't do that. What we do instead is nationalism. We become religious fundamentalists. We become fanatics. We think our group, because of the virtue of us being born to it, somehow God loves our group more. It's complete nonsense.
Yeah, well, we have more rights than you because
we're better than you somehow.
And because of our blood.
Yeah.
This whole bloodline situation where someone is better than the other because he's born into this family or tribe. I just don't understand.
Why would an omnipotent being who made the universe favor one group over the other? It's so random and arbitrary. Like, why would an omnipotent being be petty ever?
Yeah. Biologically, we all go back to the same person if we just want to think about it.
Yeah. And so, like, at the end of the day, these conversations that we're having are irrational, crazy conversations.
Because we all came from the same place. Like, if we track back all human beings,
whether you're a religious person or you're looking for science, we either came from Kenya or we came from the Garden of Eden. And either way, we all come from the same origin. Yeah. Why would you think that somehow this omnipotent being likes you more than the guy standing next to you? It doesn't make any logical sense. Yeah. But that's what we do. That
person lived in Africa for a very long time, that his skin was too exposed to the sun. So just needed less absorption of the sun, so turned darker.
And so now God hates him for some reason.
And then the person who was living in Iceland, places that there wasn't much sun exposure, it had to go lighter to get more sun in and get absorbed.
And now for some reason God likes that guy more.
Right? So that's those little things. And I think, look, I don't blame the people. I blame the policymakers and the people who are in charge of those decisions. The leaders that we spoke about, the minority and not the majority. Because the majority, they just want to live their life and they just want to feel safer. And I think that's a defense mechanism today. A lot of people are racist because they prefer safe spaces with people that they know and with faces that they're familiar with.
We can prove that. So if you look at Germany's elections over the last 25 years, especially since the United States blew Iraq up the second time and caused this catastrophic immigration wave, especially after Syria collapsed. If you look at the way voting turns out in Germany, it actually makes the East German-West German border. So West Germany and Berlin vote very moderate. They either vote center-right or center-left. East Germany, what used to be East Germany, votes extreme far-right. They're literally voting for the Nazi party, AfD, Alternative für Deutschland. Those guys are anti-immigrant, and that's the ballot they run on, and that's how they're getting their votes. Well, if you were to take a map of the immigrant population in Germany and superimpose it, it's also the same exact map. In other words, AfD, the Nazis, do the best in the parts of Germany that have virtually no immigrants. In the parts of Germany where there's a large immigrant population, they do poorly. One of the interesting things about that is much of that immigrant population, the majority of the refugees for sure, but also a huge chunk of the immigrant, don't have the right to vote because they're not citizens. So in other words, it's not that the immigrants are going and voting moderate. It's that the citizens who are next to the immigrants, who got to know them, don't fear them, and then vote moderate. The people who don't have contact with them, who are steeped in ignorance, are voting Nazi because they're scared.
I know a friend who went to a private school. Well, I got to know this guy a very long time ago after I graduated. I traveled with him, and he said that I don't have a Bedouin friend. He lives in Kuwait, and that's, for me, that was unheard of. We were all in Kuwait, we mix a lot, but he was in a private school, put into those little situations, well, very isolated. And he never had Bedouin friends, which for me didn't make sense. And I realized that he just didn't like them. But he wasn't racist towards them. He just didn't like them because he just never got to know them. I lived in the UK, and I was forced into a situation to be with originally Bedouin Kuwaitis, and I had to stay with them and like sleep over and stuff because I was a student and my brother made me. I was 16 at the time, and they were older than me. They were looking after me. And my perspective changed a lot after this experience because before I just never mixed with them really. I was just friends, but I never lived with them and had proper a mix with them, you know. But I started sleeping over. They would start becoming my really, really good friends till this day. And I just started viewing them super differently. And then people who just never mixed with and were isolated from different groups of people were more racist.
Exactly.
And now that you've been saying that, I was like, yeah, I had a similar experience.
You can track this in the U.S. If you look at the districts that vote Republican, they're the ones with the lowest immigrant populations. It's the reality is ignorance breeds this kind of phobia, this xenophobia, fear of foreigners. Okay, but wait.
Tell me.
I want to piggyback on something we had said earlier because now I'm going to bring it around.
Yeah.
So remember, you quoted the representative who said the United States will never be a Muslim country.
Yeah.
And the United States is 1.2% Muslim. Like, this is not a thing that's about to happen. The Jewish population is like 2.1%.
Yeah, there are more Jews in the US.
Like, that's a bigger threat, and it's not a threat. I didn't want to like start like some kind of anti-Semitic thing. Please don't do this. The rise of anti-Semitism in the United States has become really frightening, but also anti-Islamic violence. The two are just completely tied together. And I think the Jewish and Muslim communities in the United States are starting to realize, we're in the same boat. We need to start working together. And I think that's a point where I'm starting to have a little bit of hope. Because if minorities like that don't start to figure out they have to start working together, they're hosed.
You remember when they, look, we won't have time today probably to go there, but when the Iraq invasion, or some people think it's liberating Iraq, but it's a definitely change of regime that happened in Iraq 2003. And in 1946, what was it, or 44, in Iran, change of regime from Reza Pahlavi to his son. Not change of regime. So there was a change of 1979, there was a change of regime in Iran. So people today talk about Israel and the government, and it's a Netanyahu government and it's an extremist government. And I think I want to really speak about the regime, the Zionist regime, and how does that tie up or tie into the whole Western civilization or the Western empowerment. Would they ever have a problem with the Zionist regime? Would they ever think about fixing or changing? Because the problem here is the Zionist regime, and not today the Arabs, they don't mind having an Israeli country, a two-state solution or a one-state solution with a different name, but they don't mind having a state for the Jews. Like that's been established, right? But we all have a problem with the Zionist regime and how they think and how they perceive and how they're being backed by Western powers. So that's really where I kind of have a complex discussion with myself, and I'm trying to understand how can we really fix things without addressing this point.
So Israel has always had Zionist regimes because that's the basis for its existence. The basis is how to create an artificial Jewish majority inside the boundary. And the way to do it was, of course, to expel as many Arabs as you could in 1948. And then once that was established, in 1967, the Israelis tragically ended up conquering the chunk that most of those refugees went to. And so in a really weird twist, they messed themselves up. And that's why they've never annexed the West Bank and Gaza Strip, because to do so means ending their majority, right? I think there's now equal number of Palestinians living in Palestine as there are Israelis. Yeah. So the only way for this to function, the only way for Israel to function is as an apartheid state. I think the world had gone, we accept. We're done. There's no way that the Arab states are ever going to be able to do anything to stop this. We have to accept that the Palestinians are always going to be in this apartheid role. Just apartheid South Africa, but it's the Palestinians. And then, of course, all of that got upended in 2023, and Netanyahu showed his true colors and began this genocide, because there's no other way to describe it. This is just slaughter. What I think the result of this is that it's forced everybody to go, wait a minute, maybe this apartheid outcome isn't tolerable and isn't acceptable, and something needs to change. So for those who are waiting for the two-state solution, it happened. The Palestinian Authority is the other state.
Okay.
Many of the UN nations already recognize Palestine, including a bunch of European states. You know, like I think Germany, Italy, Austria are the last major European states not to recognize Palestine. Even Canada and Great Britain said they will, but there needs to be free and fair elections, whatever. Yeah. So they maybe will change their mind, but the Palestinian Authority is that. So there is no two-state solution. It's already happened. Okay. The one-state solution is you create a single secular state, but the instant you do it, the Jews have to accept that they're not going to be the majority. They're certainly not going to have 80%. They're probably going to be 55%, or 45%. So they're going to be a large minority. If you were to do that, you just have to create some kind of safeguard for them that makes sure that they can live in peace, prosper, and do well. That's the point we're at. Those are the only options on the table. We accept the genocide and the apartheid state and keep doing this two-state nightmare, or we push Israel to make a peace deal. I think the Israelis should make the peace deal while they have the upper hand. Netanyahu has no intention of ever making a peace deal. No. He wants to do war forever because he's part of the faction of Israelis, the 51%, who think that war forever is the way Israel survives. There's that 49% who are starting to rethink this and are thinking, maybe this isn't a great solution. In the United States, one of the reasons why there's so much Islamophobia is the politicians push it. And the reason the politicians push it is the same reason we created the Cold War. We discovered that the best way to motivate people is through fear and hatred.
Create an enemy.
You create an enemy and you tell them that that enemy is coming for you. So in the United States, what does it have to fear? I mean, maybe China to a degree, but not really. We have how many aircraft carriers and how many nukes?
Yeah, but what do you think about the 1990s, where it was like more or less, I wouldn't say a golden age for the world, but I'd say it's the least heavy in terms of wars, right? Like after the 1991 war, maybe I'm mistaken, but those 10 years, the Soviet Union was dismantled. There wasn't a clear enemy in front of the United States. There was good times, like there wasn't bad wars like how it's happening today. Wasn't the best time. It was better times, let's say, maybe.
Yeah.
Right?
No, if you look at the number of wars that broke out during the Clinton years, because that's the majority of this.
That's fine. No, that's fine. Don't worry.
So rude.
No.
Turn that off.
No, don't worry. No, it's fine.
All right. So
was the 1990s maybe the best years for the world in terms of being peaceful?
If you look at the number of wars that broke out during the Clinton administration, yes, there are fewer wars than in the 10 years before or 10 years after. It was a period where the United States really could have done some incredible work, and Bill Clinton squandered it. He had the perfect opportunity to sink in an alliance with the Russians. He had the perfect opportunity to reshape the Middle East. He threw away one opportunity after the other because he was short-sighted. He didn't have enough smart people around him. I don't know what it was. He was paid by too many. He was too busy having sex scandals. Whatever it was, he threw away the 90s. The 90s were a chance to set the world on a nice course. Instead, we ended up with George Bush Jr. And he was a catastrophe. He was a nightmare from hell. He caused so much suffering and misery, and he upended the entire global system to the point where the world stopped looking to the United States as an example for what you wanted to aspire to become, and just saw the United States as another evil actor. And in the process then, you know, Obama came in and tried to fix it. He messed some things up in the process. He was definitely not perfect. And then the American public had this crazy backlash because they couldn't stand that there was a black Muslim president, and next thing you know, we have Trump.
He wasn't Muslim though, was he?
He's not, no. But his middle name.
Yeah, but Hussein.
Yeah. Whenever people would say that, I'd go, I'm sorry, sweetheart. His first and last name were also Muslim. Like the whole thing. It was the whole thing. Just, it's okay. It's going to be okay. The Christian leader of Ethiopia had a Muslim name. Like, it's okay. It's not the worst thing to ever happen to a person.
I think Obama. I think Obama was very unfortunate because he inherited what happened in after the recession was.
Yeah.
Right, the recession was towards the beginning of the Obama term when he wanted hope.
It was a depression, for the record. We call it the Great Recession because we're the land of 1984 doublethink, but it was the second worst depression.
Was it depression?
Yeah, it was after the Great Depression, the next worst depression.
Yeah. So next worst depression, the Great Depression. So he inherited that, and then the uprising happened, but he didn't. A lot of people say.
You mean? The Arab Spring?
The Arab Spring,
okay.
Yeah. So you call it the Arab Spring. So some people call it Uprising Spring. Depends on your narrative.
Yeah. The Arab Spring that went global and was happening all over the world, including the United States.
But if it was the Arab Spring, ironically, the nation that gained the most was Iran. So that's why I don't think it's an Arab Spring. I think it was an Iranian
it was a disaster.
Spring, right?
It ended in nothing. Tunisia was like the one state that maybe was starting to have free and fair elections, and they just threw that away. So it was a 100% fail.
It was a fail, and
100%.
And the country that gains the most was Iran. They came out on top, and a lot was blamed on Obama. But you said something quite interesting a few moments ago, is that a lot of people before the 2000s were looking up to the United States, and they think that they would be able to be the good people that will be able to help us. And we were doing some research, and we found that in 1919 there was a King Crane Commission, and that formed following the peace conference in 1919. And from this commission there was they did a consensus, and they found that there are people. I think was it in Nila, can you find that out? If it's in Jordan, they wanted an American mandate. That's how much people loved Americans back then, because they were helping people.
Yeah.
They had hospitals,
right?
And when they did the consensus, people didn't mind an American mandate.
Yeah.
But at the time, there was more uprising towards colonialism and all of these powers coming, and people started to realize that we don't want to have these people around us anymore, controlling our countries. So, but ironically, or let's say for America, the case was different. The United States, people looked at them very differently.
Yeah.
That's how people would like to look at them. But now, as more time and with this administration and with what's happening in Palestine and Gaza, it's just that PR is failing. And
the true colors are coming out, because the United States has always been this
true
country.
colors, that the one that we're speaking about is just racism? Is it just pure racism, comes down to pure racism?
Racism, classism is also a huge component of this. The United States, at the end of the day, is the premier capitalist state on the planet. And its goal has always been to push a capitalist agenda. It is imperialist. It does empire differently than the British and the French did, but it has created the largest, most powerful empire in human history. It didn't plant its flag everywhere, but when you look at all the places it has a military base,
Yeah.
I mean, the United States has a military presence probably in 80% of the world's states.
Nira, type this on YouTube, on Google, sorry, America's military base. And let's just get an image.
There's a bunch that are secret, so we don't actually know the number. You can't look this up.
You can't, huh?
What happens is a body will come home. So, for example, I don't remember how many years ago it was. Let's just say 5 years ago, there was a dead military service personnel that came home from Niger. So we went, oh, there's a U.S. military presence in Niger. And that's how we find out where U.S.
So you just don't know.
You don't know. And it's kept secret, which I think is interesting for a country that's supposed to be a democracy, that the American people don't even have a clue. the extent to which we're an
So
empire.
it's just about like gaining power economically, is it?
So here's the weird thing. Everything we've been doing for the last 40 or so years has actually worked against us economically. We've made one awful decision starting with Reagan. George Bush Sr. wasn't too bad. He sort of stabilized. Actually, a lot of what George Bush Sr. did as president was undo Reagan. Clinton kept it where Sr. had it and then made some mistakes. Bush then reaccelerated the process. And so if you look at Bush Jr., if you look at this last 44 years, it's been one bad decision after the other, piled on top of each other. And the United States has wrecked itself economically. It's heading towards $38 trillion worth of debt. It doesn't produce anything anymore. It's ruined its relationships with its own allies. It's weakened NATO. If you look at it from a rational, self-interested point of view, the United States looks insane and has looked insane for the last 44 years. And in the process, it's wrecked its reputation. But the reputation was never true. We were always an apartheid state. We're still an apartheid state. We don't make open rules about it anymore. We just do it through finances.
What do you mean through finances?
So one of the crazy things that happened in the last 44 years is Americans have turned against taxes. Well, how do roads get built? How do hospitals get built? How do schools get built? You need taxes, or if you're lucky, you have a bunch of oil. Now, the irony is the United States has a bunch of oil. The United States is the largest energy producer on the planet.
Yeah.
The people would be like, the United States is the Saudi Arabia of the planet. No, you just say the United States is the United States of the planet, because the United States has always been a top energy producer. Texas produces 30% of the United States' energy. So Texas by itself is one of the largest energy producers on the planet. Its GDP, by the way, is about the same as Saudi Arabia's, and its population is the same as Saudi Arabia. So it's about per capita the same GDP.
Wow.
You'd never know that if you were in Texas, because Texas is like a third world country.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. It provides no services to its public. It completely neglects its public. Its public schools are awful. They used to be the worst. They're now like 45th or something like that. So they're now no longer the worst. There's like 5 states worse. It doesn't feel like a super wealthy state. And the reason is because the goal of the United States is to hoard the wealth in the hands of a handful of people. And everything else is just exploit. So the United States exploits its own public. It wants to exploit the rest of the world. But it's become irrational.
But exploiting it for who?
Yeah, that's what I don't understand. I don't understand the United States' goals anymore. So between 1948 and 1973, the United States became very egalitarian. The distance between the richest person and the poorest person had shrunk. And there was enormous wealth in the United States. It was the heyday for the United States economically. It was a 25-year span of time post-World War II. Piketty, the French author, wrote Capital in the 21st Century, that book. In it, he says it's the only time in human history where you could get a job and work your way to wealth. He said all the other times in human history, you need to either marry into wealth or be born into it or win the lottery.
That's when Walt Disney started working as well. The American dream started.
Well, Disney's before that.
Was that?
Yeah, this is 48 to 73. It's
48, 73. But I mean, wasn't Walt Disney during that time?
He started before that. Yeah.
But I mean, the American dream
yes, he's
and the
still
whole
going.
concept of American dream
Exactly.
was built during that time.
And that's the period people look to. We the world goes, yeah, that. But the crazy thing is Nixon comes in and his goal is to undo it. One of the things the U.S. figured out was if you have a rich public, that rich public spends its money. That fuels the economy, and the rich get richer, and the poor get richer, and the middle class gets richer. And Nixon and Reagan and most of the politicians over the last 44 years, their goal has been to upend that system and send us the other direction. So in 1973, the top 1% made 8% of the wealth generated that year. Today, the top 1% makes more than 40% of the wealth generated. The next 15% make another 40%. So the top 16% in the U.S. makes 80% of the wealth. In other words, this idea of the American dream is gone. There's no middle class. The middle class has been eviscerated. The bottom 84% share 20% of the wealth. Gen Z knows they will never own a house. They don't even buy cars. They don't even get their driver's license because they know they're not going to get there.
That's happening everywhere in the world.
It is. It's a bizarre space that we're in. Why? It's 2025. We're supposed to have flying cars. Like, how did we get here? And the answer is one bad decision after the other. There used to be a question in political science: what's more important, institutions or leaders? And I think the evidence is now abundantly clear. Leaders are the only thing that matters. Like, it doesn't matter if you're a monarchy or a democracy or whatever. If you have good leaders, you're going to have great outcomes. If you have bad leaders, you're going to have bad outcomes.
Dr. Roy, thank you so much for coming. I wanted to, you're definitely coming back. That's not even a choice. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think Munira's realized that already. I think the audience have realized that already. That's a great conversation. Loved having you. I'd love to have you again because there are so many things I'd like to talk to you about, and these conversations I think are very constructive, and I think we need to have them more often. Like, I want to speak about Jamal Abdel Nasser, Anwar al-Sadat, the war that happened on Kuwait, just all of these things that happened in the 1900s.
Yeah,
a lot of events, as the Suez Canal, what have you, ISIS, all of these little things. I think that's going to be very constructive. And thank you again for accepting the invite.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I've been a fan personally for a very long time, so I feel very honored to have you here, and I hope to see you again.
Oh, I can't wait.
Take it easy.
Bye.
It's unscripted, بدون ورقة. So did you?
It has a very different meaning in the United States.
So بدون ورقة is without papers.
Without papers.
Yeah. So you were mentioning.
Yeah. So when Italians started going to the United States, that's the point when the United States decided paperwork really mattered. Because up until then, paperwork wasn't very important for immigrants. You just sort of showed up and you said who you were, and people just accepted that, and you moved on. So if you showed up as an Italian immigrant to the United States, as you're getting processed through Ellis Island, they would stamp WOP on your forehead without papers. And so the derogatory term then formed out of that for Italians. And since I'm part Italian, I feel comfortable saying it, WOP, meaning without papers. And so the majority of the Italian population coming through in the 1910s and 20s were humiliated in this way as they're going through the process. My family came over from Austria-Hungary, even though they were Italian, and they didn't get that because they did have their paperwork in order. But one of the phenomena that take place a lot at Ellis Island was your name got changed.
Really?
Yeah.
What to, for example?
So I'll give you an example of a family that was associated with the Casagrandas who moved to Colorado, because my family ended up going to Michigan, but my great-grandfather's uncle went to Colorado, and so there was a family that went with them called Dalla Valle. That was their name in Italy, actually in Austria-Hungary, but they had an Italian last name. Dalla Valle means of the valley. When they arrived at Ellis Island, it got chopped to Dalla, which just means of the. So their last name became of the.
So of the what?
Yeah, exactly. My grandfather was 5 years old, and his name was Edwino Guerino Casagranda. And they changed it from Edwino, should have been Edwin. They didn't. They made him Edward. So one of the things they like to do was anglicize your name, but then sometimes they just messed up. Like, they should have anglicized him to Edwin, and he got anglicized to Edward instead. And so the name of your show is really interesting.
So without papers is WOP, and they'll stamp it literally.
Yeah, they ink stamp on your forehead.
Because as they were doing their paperwork, just
and
for
they
them
process them out, and then they would go to a different place.